The story kicks off just the way you'd expect. Mahmut Tigral, this confused kid who just aced the toughest military exam in Turkey, is chilling in some old ruins with his golden eagle, Iskender, trying to figure out his next move. After clearing his head, he heads back to the nation's palace to officially snag the title of Pasha, after hustling for what feels like forever to reach that rank. Later that night, there's a festival going on. While most teens are out there dancing and chasing after pretty girls, Mahmut's off in a corner hitting the books. His longtime buddy, Ibrahim, rolls into town and starts poking fun at him for studying during a party. But he also makes sure to give Mahmut props for finally becoming a pasha after all those sleepless nights. Mahmut knows Ibrahim too well to take offense, so he just asks how his friend's family is doing. Ibrahim says everyone's good. While they're catching up, Shara, the top dancer in all of Altan, swings by to say hi. Ibrahim clocks her instantly and introduces her to Mahmut. Shara's a bold one, so she already knows about Mahmut and his serious, brooding vibe. She kneels and congratulates him on becoming the youngest pasha in their history. Then, out of nowhere, she grabs his hand and drags him to the dance floor, getting him to awkwardly sway to the music. Everyone's watching, and his friends are hyping him up, forcing him to dance with the crowd. Mahmut toughs it out until it's finally over, and then chills with Ibrahim at a lookout spot, talking about the people and how much he wants to protect them. Ibrahim jokes that Mahmut shouldn't forget about the ladies now that he's a big deal. Mahmut tries to tell him he's not into that, but then he realizes his diary's missing. Furious, he storms off, leaving Ibrahim behind, and heads home, only to find Shara passed out on his bed. She's all flirty, trying to get him to loosen up, but Mahmut's not having it. When he tries to kick her out, she grabs his diary and starts teasing him again. Turns out, she found it in the plaza and figured it was his. Mahmut tells her to get lost, but he can't just let her wander the streets alone at night, so he ends up sleeping on the roof and wakes up super early the next morning to chase down a thief. While the cops are scratching their heads, Mahmut tracks the guy down and corners him at a junction. He orders the thief to drop the goods, but the dude underestimates him. Big mistake. Mahmut uses Iskender to teach the guy a lesson he won't forget, breaking a few bones in the process. Later that day, Mahmut gets called in for an emergency meeting with the Altan Council. Before the meeting kicks off, a narrator breaks down the situation between Turkey and the Balt-Rhine Empire. Apparently, the empire pulled a sneak attack on Turkey, sparking a war that only lasted a few months. Things have been tense ever since, and now the empire's prime minister has turned up dead, riddled with Turkian arrows. The empire's pissed and sends a message to Turkey, demanding they send an envoy within 7 days, or it's war. During the meeting, Zaganos Pasha and Halil Pasha, both high-ranking officials like Mahmut, get into it over whether they should strike first against the empire. Halil thinks it's way too risky and unnecessary, but Zaganos, the warmonger, is all about starting a war. The council listens to both of them go back and forth until they finally agree to send someone as a delegate to the empire, a sacrificial lamb to keep the peace. Before they can finalize the plan, Mahmut shows up and suggests a third option. But Zaganos, being the jerk he is, shuts him down and calls him a kid for being too idealistic. The meeting ends with Mahmut storming off, clearly pissed. Later, Halil finds Mahmut venting somewhere random and takes a walk with him. He tries to understand Mahmut's perspective and realizes the guy's just doing everything he can to stop another war from breaking out. Mahmut's frustrated with himself for not coming up with a solution that everyone can agree on. After hearing Mahmut's concerns, Halil tells him to stop sulking and focus on doing whatever it takes to prevent the war. That pep talk gives Mahmut the light bulb moment he's been waiting for. He dives into a 2-day investigation to prove Turkey didn't kill the empire's prime minister. Finally, he cracks it. He notices the arrow feathers used in the crime are made from a different material than the eagle feathers normally used by Turkey. Mahmut rushes to tell Halil, but when he gets to the palace, he finds out Halil has already volunteered to be the scapegoat. Mahmut confronts Zaganos about it, but Zaganos shrugs and says Halil did it willingly. He also mentions Halil just left, so Mahmut still has time to catch up. Mahmut jumps on a horse and races after him. When Halil spots Mahmut coming, he stops and waits. On the way, Mahmut reminisces about his childhood, remembering a time he found some beautiful gems along a mountain path and pocketed one of them. Meanwhile, Empire Minister Virgilio Louis, the guy behind the fake arrow scheme, hears about Turkey's envoy and realizes what's happening. He updates his king, hinting that things might take another dark turn. Back with Mahmut and Halil, Mahmut tells Halil he doesn't have to sacrifice himself, but Halil brings up how powerless they were back when their nation was losing to the empire. Mahmut takes a moment to remember how awful that time was, especially since he lost his parents. Halil apologizes apologizes for being a coward and says this is his way of making up for it. Mahmut tells him to cut it out and shows him the arrow, explaining what he discovered. Halil thanks him and says this evidence is the key to saving Torquay from a pointless war. Fired up, Mahmut promises they'll stop the war together. They continue their journey until they reach the ravines, where they're ambushed by assassins sent by Louis. But Mahmut and Halil are ready for them. They trick the assassins into thinking they've won. Then Mahmut jumps out and takes them down with his sharp mind and his trusty eagle. The next morning, they arrive at the Empire and present the evidence to the Emperor. After hearing everything, the Emperor dismisses the case and resolves the issue. With the crisis averted, Mahmut and Halil head back to Torquay and report what happened. Instead of thanking Mahmut for saving the day, Zaganos, the scumbag, warns him that his luck won't last forever. Meanwhile, Louis isn't done scheming. Even though his plan was ruined, he meets with some nomads and promises to give them the fortress city of Hisar if they agree to work with him. About 4 years ago, Mahmut met Ibrahim for the first time during their military exam. Back then, Mahmut was this uptight, spoiled daddy's boy who couldn't move on from the war that took his family. Acting all serious and hard-working, Mahmut would dodge conversations with his peers and bury himself in whatever he was doing to ace his exams. When the results came out, Mahmut and the other recruits got their moment of fame in the city, where everyone got to meet the new political officials of the nation. Now, sitting deep in thought, Mahmut remembers how his big dream of becoming Pasha and solving world hunger right after graduation was just wishful thinking. Turns out, being a politician is way more complicated than his naive younger self imagined. Still lost in his thoughts, Mahmut recalls how distant he was from his peers, especially the time he failed a drill because he couldn't lead others. That day, his handler chewed him out so bad he went home in tears. Ibrahim, his best friend, rode home with him that evening and was stunned to see his super serious buddy crying like a kid. Mahmut asked Ibrahim if trying to become Pasha was even worth it. Ibrahim, who wanted to become the Vali of his hometown, Hisar, told him that if they both worked hard for their goals, they could make it happen. For the rest of the ride, Ibrahim hyped Mahmut up, telling him to stick to his dream no matter what. Fast forward to today, Mahmut is blindsided by the news that his best friend, Ibrahim, now the Vali of Hisar and one of the kindest people he's ever known, has turned against their nation, Torquay. Ibrahim joined forces with the Araba tribe and declared Hisar an independent country. None of it made sense. While Mahmut was off writing poems and napping on rooftops, Ibrahim was storming a merchant's mansion, kicking his men out of the oasis, and enforcing martial law. As soon as this news hit, Zaganos, a war-hungry guy in their circle, jumped at the chance to rally his 4,000 troops and crush the rebellion in Hisar to restore order. That evening, Mahmut stopped Zaganos just as he was about to head out and begged him to hold off. Attacking their own people could backfire big time, but Zaganos laid it out straight. The situation was way more serious than Mahmut realized. If Hisar becomes its own country, the Empire will swoop in, take it over, and gain a direct route to invade Torquay. Even after hearing this, Mahmut pleaded with Zaganos to reconsider, but Zaganos wasn't budging. He was more interested in figuring out who might be pulling Ibrahim's strings. With that, Zaganos rode off into the sunset, leaving Mahmut wondering if Zaganos had known about the rebellion all along. Determined to get answers, Mahmut set out that night with Shara, heading straight for Hisar. On the way, he hoped he could reach Ibrahim before things spiraled out of control and his people got wiped out. Meanwhile, Louis, another player in this mess, reported the rebellion to the Emperor and suggested sending troops to pretend to side with the Araba tribe. This would help sway public opinion and officially claim Hisar as part of the Empire. The Emperor pointed out that the Turkish troops weren't dumb. They wouldn't wait around for the Empire's soldiers to show up. But Louis reminded him about Duchess Lelederik, aka Lele, and her 10,000 infantrymen. The Emperor gave Louis the green light to send a signal after sundown. Meanwhile, Ibrahim is chilling in a tent with the leader of the Arabans, where his whole family is being held. He promises to stick to the deal as long as the Arabans get the Hisar families to safety. Then, one of those shady warrior chicks shows up and throws shade at Ibrahim, calling him dumb for trusting people so easily and letting his people's families get snatched up as hostages. Meanwhile, Shara and Mahmut sneak into Hisar dressed as women. They creep over to the tent and discover it's drenched in oil. Mahmut's brain goes into overdrive and he starts freaking out, imagining the worst. Right then, word gets to the tent that Zaganos' forces are closing in on Hisar. The whole tent goes into panic mode because this wasn't part of the plan. One of the tall jerks from the enemy army steps up, calming everyone down, and says they need to wait for the Imperial army to show up before making any moves. He turns to Ibrahim and tells him what he can do to stop Zaganos' forces from getting into the city. Ibrahim bounces out of the tent and heads for the walls to try and hold Zaganos' men back. On the way, he spots Mahmut and throws out a compliment about his disguise. Hearing his voice, Mahmut realizes he's gotta act fast. When Ibrahim gets to the top of the wall, he tells his warriors to get ready to fire as soon as the sun comes up to keep Zaganos' men from reaching the gates. He knows Zaganos' forces have way more people and way better skills, so it's only a matter of time before they're overwhelmed. On the flip side, Zaganos is running through all the possible outcomes in his head and realizes that showing up early has totally messed up the Empire's plan to take over Hisar. Once the sun's up, they'll hit the fortress and take Hisar back. Right before the fight kicks off, Zaganos gets word that Lele's massive 40,000 strong army is heading for Hisar too. Lele soon figures out that Zaganos and his crew beat her to the punch. She's kinda bummed about it and tells Louis how she feels. Her guy, Glalat, asks if he should just take out the Emperor's envoy who came with them so they can jump into the fight with Zaganos ASAP. For now, they decide to stay quiet and see how things play out. Zaganos realizes he made a big mistake and wishes he'd thought things through better. Ibrahim, on the other hand, senses the vibe of the battle shifting. He starts overthinking everything, trying to come up with a way to save his family and his people. While he's spiraling, one of his warriors shows up and reminds him how much he loves his homeland and Hisar. The guy tells Ibrahim that if he wants to take down Zaganos, they'll back him up and won't judge him for it. Now Ibrahim's stuck. He doesn't want his men to die for no reason, but he's gotta make a call. This guard from Araba catches Shara and Mahmut slipping and demands to know what they're up to. Shara, being slick, puts on a whole show and convinces the guard they're just dancers there to have a good time. The guard totally buys it and even calls over some of his buddies to join in on the fun. While they're vibing, Shara casually asks how they found out about Hisar becoming its own nation. One of the guys spills the tea, saying it was some nice minister from the Empire who told them and gave them instructions on what to do about Hisar. Shara doesn't waste time and gets the crowd hyped by dancing with them. Meanwhile, this tall jerk notices the commotion outside and sends one of his lackeys to shut it down. But before they can do anything, Mahmut steps up, gets everyone's attention, and exposes the Empire's shady plans to use the Arabans for their political games. Hearing all this, the Arabans start questioning everything they've been told. The tall guy leaves the scene to Eleanor, yeah, that shady chick from earlier, and pulls Mahmut aside for a little chat. He grills Mahmut about his earlier moves, trying to figure out where he stands. Mahmut, cool as ever, makes it clear he's here to avenge his friend and protect him from s***s like the tall guy in the Empire. The tall dude tells Mahmut to stop letting his feelings run the show and act like a real politician, unlike Ibrahim. But Mahmut's not about that life. Things get heated, and Mahmut goes off, attacking the guy and breaking his sword to reveal what's hidden inside. After their first clash, the tall guy threatens Mahmut, saying if he doesn't drop his weapon, he'll blow a whistle that'll signal his people to set the tent, covered in oil, on fire. Mahmut, knowing he's cornered, drops his weapon and lets the guy talk trash about him and his ideals. After spouting a bunch of random garbage about Mahmut and his beliefs, the jerk takes another cheap shot at him, then grabs him by the head and tells him to never even think about crossing the Empire again. Mahmut keeps quiet and counts on his trusty golden eagle, Iskender, to handle the rest of the plan. Meanwhile, over in Hisar, the Arabans start grilling Eleanor and the Empire's warriors about the accusations Mahmut threw at them. Instead of calming them down, Eleanor basically tells them to shut their mouths or she'll torch the tent and take their families with it. Ibrahim, watching the chaos from the wall, wonders what's going down. But for now, all he can do is wait and pray the Imperial army comes through on their word. If not, he and his family are toast. Outside the city walls, Zaganos and his troops are stuck in a stalemate. Zaganos, not wanting to screw up again, decides to take a risky move. He preps a special poison to weaken the 40,000 strong enemy army and stack the odds in his favor. Meanwhile, Lele is bored out of her mind waiting for Louis's Rod Orm official to give the signal to fight the Torkians. Fed up, she sets her dog, Glalat, loose on the official to speed things up. Back in the tent, Eleanor catches Shara trying to cut it open and free the prisoners. She shuts her down and demands to know why she's messing around. Around the same time, Lele finally takes out the official and rallies her troops for battle. Meanwhile, Mahmut is still getting his butt handed to him by the tall jerk who won't stop ranting about his selfish ideals. Mahmut argues back, but yeah, it doesn't end well for him. Luckily, Iskender returns with some wild eagles, ready to help Mahmut pull off his plan. Shara stays quiet, waiting for the right moment. When the time comes, Iskender and his eagle crew swoop in, rip the tent open, free Ibrahim's people, and torch the Imperial soldiers holding them hostage. From the wall, Ibrahim sees the tide turning and orders his men to let Zaganos' troops into the city. Mahmut finally gets the upper hand, and Lele, the useless duchess, retreats back to the Empire with their plans in shambles. To cover their tracks, Lele and Glalat make it look like the official was crushed by a boulder. Mahmut gets back on his feet, grabs his sword, and fights the tall jerk for real this time. After dodging a few attacks, he manages to get the guy in a chokehold. Mahmut makes his ancestors proud by choking the life out of him and leaving his body to rot. With the fight behind him, Mahmut heads back to Turkey to meet with the Divan and the other 13 pashas to figure out what to do next. At the start of the Divan, Ibrahim's got to defend himself against the accusations thrown his way. He claims everything he did was for his family in Turkey. When asked why he left his city for Altın, he explains he went there during the festival to attend a meeting set up by Zaganos. The king questions Zaganos, and he backs up Ibrahim's story. Then Mahmut gets called out to explain why he let the people of Hisar go, even though they tried to betray Turkey. Turns out, Mahmut convinced Zaganos to release the Arabans by reminding him of his past mistake and pointing out that the Arabans were the ones who drove the imperial soldiers back to their own turf. Realizing his error, Zaganos let the Arabans go. Afterward, Mahmut thanked Shara for her help and headed back home. He also explained that if they'd harmed the Arabans, it could have sparked a rebellion against Turkey, which might have given the empire an excuse to attack. With all the facts laid out, the council wraps up the meeting to deliberate. While waiting for their decision, Mahmut remembers his last talk with Ibrahim after saving his people and twins from the enemy. Ibrahim was super worried about his future since he looked like the guy who started the rebellion. Later, the Divan reconvenes, and the verdict is announced. Ibrahim and Zaganos are pardoned as leaders of their communities, but Mahmut gets stripped of his Pasha title and demoted to Binbashi, now serving under Halil Pasha of the 7th province. Ibrahim loses it, not understanding why Mahmut's being punished for something he didn't do. Mahmut keeps quiet and later visits Halil after the Divan. Halil stays calm and asks Mahmut why he wants to be a Pasha. Mahmut gives the obvious answer, to stop another war, but Halil calls him out, saying he was selfish and reckless for abandoning his duties as Pasha to save a friend. Sure, it was noble, but it wasn't the right move for the country. Losing his title is a chance for Mahmut to learn how to protect all of Turkey, not just his personal interests. Mahmut then asks if Turkey is gearing up for war, but Halil doesn't answer. That night, Zaganos finds Mahmut sulking and indirectly thanks him for saving him from his dumb mistake. Even so, Zaganos points out that Mahmut's actions weren't exactly right, it just happened to work out. As a thank you, Zaganos gives Mahmut a Pyramis device, which he uses to communicate with his spies across different lands, even in the Empire. Mahmut suddenly pieces together all the sneaky stuff Zaganos has been up to and gets mad at him. But then he realizes he's been too caught up in his own selfish goals to see the bigger picture. He humbly accepts the gift and sets off for his hometown to learn how to be a better leader. Meanwhile, Louis, Lele, and Glalat are having lunch and talking about expanding their power and taking over Turkey. Louis vows not to mess up again. Now that he knows Zaganos has spies everywhere, his plan is to track them down and take them out. Hearing this, the Duchess and Glalat raise their glasses to toast their upcoming victory over Turkey. During his trip back to his hometown, Mahmut dozes off and has the worst nightmare ever. In it, the dark corners of his mind remind him how much of a failure he is, rubbing it in that there's not much he can do now that he's no longer the Pasha of the land. Luckily, he wakes up just before losing track of the road and finally makes it back to Yeni Tugril village. When he steps off his carriage, he takes a deep breath, soaking in the air of his old stomping grounds and feeling the soil where his mom and the others were buried after the war. He looks out at the now empty fields that used to be full of life and crops 12 years ago and wishes things hadn't turned out this way. But he quickly shakes off the nostalgia and heads into the village to get on with his mission. Once in the village, Mahmut stops by the water shrine and offers up the Pyramis crystal as a prayer, hoping to activate it and send out a signal to anyone nearby. He manages to get the crystal to work a little, shooting a colorful beam of light into the sky, hoping one of Zaganos' spies will pick up on it and come find him. No luck though, nobody shows up. Later that night, Iskender notices a shift in the weather. He gives Mahmut a heads up, and Mahmut realizes it's time for the eagles to migrate north. That means he won't be able to use the wild eagles for any of his plans until winter rolls around. Mahmut thanks Iskender for the info and gives his eagle a quick pat. Just then, some washed-up, drunk, two-faced old guy stumbles into the room where Mahmut's hanging out. The guy introduces himself as Barbaros, the flag bearer and kulak of Tugril village. Mahmut sizes him up, noticing how old he looks, and asks why he's still carrying the flag. Barbaros breaks it down for him, explaining that he's also the village's spy. Kulaks, as he explains, are special spies stationed at water shrines in key cities and villages across the continent. Their job? To ID agents from Zaganos, pass along any intel they've collected, and act as go-betweens to keep the network running smoothly. Mahmut finally gets why he's been told to visit water shrines in every new city he goes to. As for current events, Barbaros warns Mahmut that Louis has been hunting hunting down spies in the Empire's territory and wiping them out in just a week. Barbaros doesn't know how much Louis and his crew have figured out, but he tells Mahmoud to stay sharp. Then, Barbaros gives Mahmoud the details about someone who's looking for him. A guy named Kulak Suleiman wants to meet him somewhere private. After his chat with Barbaros, Mahmoud heads to the meeting spot, wondering what Suleiman could want. Eventually, Suleiman shows up, greets him, and welcomes him to Zaganos' spy network. Meanwhile, Barbaros kicks back at his usual spot, waiting for the higher-ups to finish their talk. Suleiman introduces himself and even shows off his eagle, Katerina. Then, he offers Mahmoud some top-notch wine from Tugril, sparking memories of the good times he had with his people before the war tore everything apart. They also chat about Iskender, who, surprise, is actually male, and how Mahmoud managed to tame him. After the small talk, Suleiman gets serious. With a sad look on his face, he starts telling his story. 12 years back, when the war between Turkey and the Empire kicked off, Suleiman was chilling in the Republic of Florence, a country famous for its smooth-talking diplomacy and packed with artsy types and romantics. While his village was getting wrecked by imperial soldiers, Suleiman was out partying and drinking with aristocrats. Then he got hit with the news that Tugril had died. That's when he asked for some time off. By the time he made it back home, the war was done and his village was wiped off the map. The guilt of surviving while everything he knew was gone ate at him, and he started wandering around Turkey with no direction. One day, he ended up in Alton and stumbled across a bunch of idiots and con artists cracking jokes about the war that had taken Tugril down. Suleiman was pissed that these losers were mocking Tugril's sacrifice, so he fought them with everything he had. That's when he crossed paths with Zaganos, who was just a scrappy 14-year-old kid back then. Zaganos saw the pain Suleiman was carrying and decided to give him a purpose. He told Suleiman that one day, when he became a pasha, he'd make him a key player in his spy network. Suleiman thought the kid was full of it, but sure enough, 5 years later, Zaganos became pasha. He tracked Suleiman down, finding him working in some store. Zaganos brought him in and schooled him on how valuable information is, explaining how Florence used intel to stay ahead, even though their military wasn't strong. To really bring Suleiman into the fold, Zaganos dropped a bombshell. The master Suleiman had been working under in Florence was actually a spy for the president, and had been for years. That revelation hit Suleiman like a ton of bricks. He didn't even argue, just accepted his new role and title. From there, Suleiman traveled the world, surviving long enough to build one of the most complex spy networks out there. Mahmoud is blown away by how sharp and bold Zaganos is with his moves. Suleiman picks up on a little shade from Mahmoud towards Zaganos and calls him out on it. Mahmoud admits that Zaganos totally crushed him during his first divan, which cracks Suleiman up. The two of them have a good laugh and chat about the clever, cocky bastard before calling it a night. But later that night, Louis sends his assassin squad, led by Eleanor, into Tugril. Their mission? Take out the Kulak Barbaros before Suleiman and Mahmoud make it back. Barbaros is still sharp and quick, like a sly fox. He spots Eleanor and her guy coming from way off and dodges death by the skin of his teeth. When he figures out who's gunning for him, he signals Suleiman and Mahmoud to come bail him out before Eleanor takes him down. The two warriors hear his whistle and book it to the scene. Barbaros is just about to feel the sharp end of Eleanor's blade when Mahmoud and Suleiman show up just in time. Mahmoud jumps in first, trying to wrangle Eleanor with his weird rope gadget, but Eleanor plays it smart, tossing sheep blood and meat all over Mahmoud, making the eagles he called turn on him. The poor guy gets swarmed by his own birds. Good thing Suleiman knows the magic sound to shoo the eagles away. He shows up, giving Mahmoud a chance to clean off all the gross stuff. While Mahmoud's dealing with that mess, Suleiman tells him how dumb it was for Eleanor to think she had the upper hand. Mahmoud finally joins back in, ready to even the odds, and charges at Eleanor, even though Suleiman tells him not to. Turns out, Mahmoud underestimated her big time. She wrecks his rope gadget and almost finishes him off. That's when Barbaros pulls a fast one, creating a smoke cloud to help everyone escape into a nearby cave. Inside, Suleiman gives Mahmoud a reality check, telling him he's not going to get anywhere acting solo. If they want to win next time, they need to work together and have a solid plan. Later, they head back to the village only to find Eleanor setting houses on fire. This time, Suleiman teams up with his brothers, and together, they take down Eleanor and her crew. Eleanor gets beat so bad she almost falls into one of the fires she started. In the end, her two lackeys sacrifice themselves so she can escape Zaganos' soldiers. Eleanor's furious about losing but manages to slip away again. At sunrise, Suleiman says goodbye to Mahmoud, hoping they'll cross paths again someday. For now though, Suleiman has to report back to Zaganos Pasha in Alton before leaving, he tells Mahmut that knowledge is power, and he needs to chase it no matter what. Mahmut decides to take his advice and heads off to Phoenicia, the oldest port city in Rumeliana, to start his next adventure. Phoenicia is this ancient ocean empire with a crazy long history, like almost 2,000 years deep. At the southern tip of the city, there's this massive lighthouse that's still got some vibes from the old days. Our guy Mahmut, who's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, just rolled into this fancy city, not really sure what's gonna go down. He's trying to play it cool, walking in all confident, but low-key hoping to stay under the radar. As he gets to the city gates, he spots an Imperial Navy ship chilling at the harbor, and immediately gets a bad feeling about what's coming. To get the scoop on what's up, Mahmut heads over to the city's water shrine and whips out his Pyramus crystal thingamajig to send out a signal for any kulak nearby to chat. Boom. Seconds later, this kulak named Kiros, who's been casually sitting on a mat right behind him, pops up and gives Mahmut a warm welcome to Phoenicia. Kiros starts spilling the tea, letting Mahmut know that the Phoenician Senate already knows he's in town, and is probably planning to summon him ASAP. Oh, and that Imperial ship? Yeah, it's a big red flag that trouble's brewing. Just as Kiros is dropping this intel, some Senate officials roll up to escort Mahmut to meet Magistros Lord Konstantinos. On the way, he spots Glalat in the hallway and instantly recognizes him. Eventually, he makes it to Konstantinos' office and meets the guy, who's all fired up and ready to chat. After some polite small talk, Konstantinos gets straight to business. He invites Mahmut to join an emergency meeting to figure out how to deal with a request from the Empire. Turns out, the Empire wants them to hand over part of their port for their fleet, and they've got 10 days to respond. Konstantinos is no fool. He knows the Empire's up to no good. He even brings up Theros, a state that the Empire already snatched up. The vibe in the other cities is tense, and Konstantinos is all about it. He's practically daring the Empire to make a move so Phoenicia can show them what a real empire looks like. The guy's clearly stuck in the past, banking on old victories and glory days. He's not a fan of how Battle Rhine's empire runs things with brute force, calling it dumb and unfair. Konstantinos asks Mahmut to back him up in this whole charade, and Mahmut, for whatever reason, agrees to go along with it. In the next scene, Mahmut is at an emergency meeting with Konstantinos and the other senators, hashing out how to respond to the Empire's demands. Konstantinos is all in for war, but the peace-loving senators want to keep things chill with diplomacy. Konstantinos lays it out straight. If they hand over the lighthouse to the Empire, they might as well give up Centro entirely. That's a no-go, because if that happens, Torquay is totally screwed. He reminds them they've got some solid advantages over the Empire's forces, but someone else pipes up, saying it's crazy to think they can take on the Empire. Konstantinos fires back, pointing out that Mahmut Pasha already stood up to the Empire at Hisar and came out on top. He paints Mahmut as the guy who beat the Empire, hyping him up to the rest of the senators. Mahmut tries to play it down, saying Konstantinos is blowing things out of proportion, but it's too late. The senators are already sold on him. The debate gets heated, but Konstantinos wins the argument. To seal the deal, they put it to a vote. While the voting's going on, Konstantinos takes a moment to tell Mahmut about their allies, the Venedic Armada, the top-tier naval fleet in Centro. He's confident their navy can crush the Empire's fleet, which is full of rookies. Mahmut begs him to find a way to avoid war, but it's already a done deal. By nightfall, everyone gathers to hear the results. Konstantinos shows up late, grabs his lamp, and announces the outcome. The majority voted to fight the Empire and defend their honor. Kulak Kiros pulls Mahmut aside and tells him to bail while he still can before things get messy. But Mahmut decides to stick around and see it through. Inside, he's torn up, feeling useless for not being able to stop the war. Konstantinos sends word to the Empire's envoy, letting them know they're choosing war and won't back down. Glalat is stunned by their decision and signals the Duchess to start moving her fleet. Lele wastes no time and sets sail for Phoenician territory, having a blast along the way. 15 days later, the Imperial Navy shows up and lays siege to the walls of Phoenicia. The battle drags on for a full day with no real progress from the Imperial side. Konstantinos points out to Mahmut how messed up their tactics are, using slaves as cannon fodder before sending in their actual soldiers. Meanwhile, inside the Phoenician walls, life goes on as usual. Konstantinos works hard to keep the people calm and fed. Mahmut, on the other hand, is stressed out, feeling powerless, and wishing there was some way he could have stopped the war from happening in the first place. During their next war meeting, the Phoenician senators start freaking out a little about their ally taking so long to show up. The trip from Venedic to Phoenicia usually takes about 9 days, and they sent out their SOS 15 days ago. They're starting to think Venedic Venedik bailed on them when they needed help the most. Mahmut, who's been eavesdropping on their convo, decides to step up and do the unthinkable. He asks for a ship so he can bust through the Imperial Navy's blockade and go hash things out with Venedik himself. He's determined to get answers and fix this mess. Konstantinos thanks him for stepping up, but says he's sticking with his gut and trusting his buddy, the leader of Venedik, who isn't the type to break promises that easily. Mahmut thinks about Ibrahim and figures Louis must be doing everything he can to break this stalemate. Meanwhile, Mahmut has no clue that the Duchess and her crew are already on the other side of these crazy, impossible crystal cliffs, getting ready to pull off a sneak attack on the Phoenicians from behind. Before making his next move, Mahmut meets up with Kiros to talk things over. Kiros starts spilling the tea about how corrupt his dad is, who, by the way, is one of the Phoenician senators. Since he was a kid, Kiros has been straight up disgusted by his dad's shady ways and how far he'll go to get what he wants. Growing up with that kind of mess, Kiros swore he'd never turn out like his dad. He wandered the city for a while until he crossed paths with Suleiman after getting caught by the Phoenician guards. Back then, Kiros thought he was killing it as a sneaky falconer and even poked fun at Suleiman, but Suleiman saw that fire in Kiros's eyes and recruited him on the spot to be a kulak. By the time night rolls around, Kiros and Mahmut are walking down some stairs, still chatting about why Mahmut's so dead set on heading to Venedik to bring back reinforcements himself. Mahmut throws out the usual excuse about how the Phoenicians can't win the war without Venedik's help, but Kiros isn't buying it and tells him to cut the crap and spill the real reason. Mahmut's about to answer when, out of nowhere, Kiros's lamp dies, and the floor under Mahmut gives way. Kiros manages to grab him and keep him from falling. Before pulling him back up, Kiros demands the truth. Mahmut thinks hard about what to say, and finally admits he's doing this for his country, Torquay. It's his duty to put his nation first, and if Kiros has a problem with that, he's free to let him go. Seeing how serious Mahmut is, Kiros pulls him back up, gives him props for his determination, and promises to get him a ship and crew to smash through the Empire's blockade so they can head to Venedik together. So Konstantinos is laying into Caesarus Apollodorus, giving him a hard time for ignoring the war. He asks if Apollodorus still thinks it was smart to go to war with the Empire. Konstantinos makes it clear he stands by his choice to fight, but Apollodorus isn't buying it. He basically says, "Nah, I'm not on your side, dude. You're making a mess of things," and warns that unless Konstantinos gets off his high horse, things could go south for the Phoenicians real quick. Meanwhile, Mahmut is hanging back, eavesdropping on their heated back and forth. Over on Glalat's ship, he's ordering the slaves to gear up for yet another suicide mission. His plan? Send them to climb the wall and distract the Phoenicians by eating a bunch of arrows, giving the Duchess time to scale the crystal wall from behind. The slaves are over it though. They're sick of being played like pawns in the Empire's war games and secretly cook up an escape plan for the next night. Glalat, still clueless, switches up the guards and sticks to Louis's orders. Meanwhile, Mahmut finds Kiros chilling on the outskirts of the city. Kiros takes him to a safe spot, hooks him up with a disguise, and helps the crew load their getaway ship with supplies. Mahmut, now rocking his new outfit, makes Kiros promise to survive this mess. By nightfall, they're double-checking for anything they might have missed before it's too late. Mahmut takes a moment to bond with the crew, listening to their chatter and pep talks. He thanks them for risking their necks to join him on this mission. With everything set, the only thing left is to quietly lower the harbor chains without tipping anyone off. Mahmut and Kiros sneak into the control room to handle it manually. Just as they're about to drop the chains, they pause to listen to some commotion upstairs. Turns out, those slaves from earlier have pulled up to Phoenicia's gates on a smaller ship, ready to surrender to the Magistros. At first, the Phoenicians think it's a trap cooked up by the Empire to get them to open the gates. But then the leader of the rebellion spills his guts, saying they're just miners from another nation who don't even know if their families are still alive. Mahmut and Kiros listen in through the communication pipes, catching every word. Before the rebels can finish their sob story, the Imperial soldiers start raining arrows on their ship. The Phoenicians take this as proof the deserters are legit. With the Empire breathing down their necks, the deserters beg the Phoenicians to let them in before it's too late. Konstantinos mulls it over and decides to give them a shot. To keep things fair, he calls for a vote, which ends up going his way. Once that's settled, they get to work raising the harbor chains. They double-check the tides to make sure everything's in their favor. Meanwhile, the Imperial fleet notices what's going on and speeds up, trying to make it through the inner gates before the deserters can get inside. The math whiz from Phoenicia crunches the numbers and figures out they've got just enough time to shut the gates before the Imperial Navy barges into the city, if they hustle. Konstantino immediately drops the harbor chains, opening a way for the deserters to sail in. As soon as the deserters hear the chains are down, they row like their lives depend on it, trying to dock before the Imperial army shows up. The second the deserters get into the harbor, harbor, the crew starts hauling the chains back up. But then Konstantinos realizes the Imperial Navy ditched their ballasts to make their ships lighter and faster. Nikifros, the brainiac mathematician, does the math again and realizes they're not gonna make it in time. Still, they keep cranking those chains as fast as they can. Just when they think they might pull it off, the seasonal winds kick in, giving the Imperial Navy an extra speed boost. Eventually, Glalat crashes his way into the city's harbor. Konstantinos scrambles to rally his soldiers, ordering them to surround the ship and stop it from landing. To make things worse, none of their own ships are ready to go. Frustrated, Konstantinos sits down, kicking himself for the mess they're in, trying to figure out his next move. Meanwhile, Apollodorus just stands there, watching the disaster unfold, already regretting everything. Luckily, Mahmut and Kiros' ship sets out just in time. They ram straight into Glalat's ship, boarding it to fight off his crew. Mahmut calls his eagle, which swoops down and drops nails on the enemy warriors. After taking down the Elvaldes mountain troops, Mahmut and his men tie them up and head below deck to hunt for any stragglers. When Kiros and the rest of the crew make it up top, Glalat climbs back onto the deck of his wrecked ship. He spots Mahmut, who's standing there with a woman, and challenges him to a duel. But before they start swinging swords, Glalat recognizes Mahmut as the eagle guy he saw back in Phoenicia. Without saying much, Glalat lets his sword do the talking. They go at it, clashing blades, and Glalat tries to throw some trash talk Mahmut's way to throw him off. Mahmut pauses for a second and calls his eagle, Iskender, for backup. Iskender swoops in, distracting Glalat, who splashes oil on the bird. Glalat keeps fighting and nearly overpowers Mahmut, but then one of Mahmut's men drops the ship's anchor, throwing Glalat off balance and letting them capture him. Kiros shows up, ties up Glalat and his crew, and gives him a choice: surrender and live, or keep fighting and die. But Glalat just keeps running his mouth, stalling for time so the Duchess and her warriors can sneak into the city. Mahmut doesn't catch on to Glalat's plan, and keeps listening to his nonsense until Glalat spills the beans about Louis's plot against Mahmut's homeland. By the time Mahmut and Kiros realize they've been played, it's too late. Glalat and his men decide to go down swinging, trying to take Mahmut and his crew with them. While Mahmut and Kiros waste time dealing with Glalat's antics, fires start raging across Phoenicia. Mahmut looks back in shock as the so-called unbreakable walls of the city are breached. The Duchess and her men storm in, taking the city. Mahmut stands there stunned, watching the city he thought was untouchable burn to the ground right in front of him. Soon enough, the rest of the Phoenician crew, including that clueless dude Konstantinos, spot the flames tearing through their homes and families from afar. Meanwhile, the Phoenician Senate starts piecing it together. Turns out the whole naval attack was just a sneaky move to distract them, while a land army rolled in to wreck their city. They were toast from the jump, all because they didn't have someone like Louis, a real chess master, running the show. The Senate's freaking out, but Konstantinos? Nah, he's still clinging to hope, telling everyone not to throw in the towel just yet. Dude really thinks his wishful thinking is gonna save the city that's already sinking like a lead balloon. At this point, the Senate's done with him, but bro's still out here shouting orders, telling the troops to hold off the Imperial soldiers until the Venedic Armada shows up to save the day. He even tries to holler at the soldiers on the wall through the sound pipes, but guess what? Apollodorus already filled them with water to shut him up. At one point, Apollodorus rolls up on Konstantinos, straight up showing him the mess he's made of the city. He's like, if we keep listening to this dude, Phoeniki is gonna be wiped off the map before sunrise. Konstantinos, still on his high horse, keeps yelling about his ideals, but Apollodorus just tunes him out. Instead, he gets the senators to vote on whether they should throw in the towel and surrender to the Imperial army. The vote's unanimous. Everyone's like, yeah, we're done here. Konstantinos looks at them like they stabbed him in the back and decides he's gonna off himself rather than watch his city crumble under Imperial rule. But Apollodorus isn't about to let that happen. He stops Konstantinos from doing something stupid and raises the white flag, officially surrendering to the Imperial army. That day, the Imperial army made history as the first crew to bust through the supposedly unbreakable crystal wall. They call it a win, and it's game over for Phoenike. Mahmut and his crew quickly realize they've got to bounce before things get worse. They quietly sail out of the country's waters, dodging the Imperial army. Meanwhile, the Phoenician soldiers ditch their posts and rush back to their homes to try and save their families. Over on the other side, Kiros and his squad manage to sneak the badly injured Mahmut out of the city. Now, they just need to get him out of enemy territory and find a doctor who can patch him up. Before hopping off the little ship, Kiros promises his crew he'll come back for them, but his buddies know Mahmut's gonna need someone to look out for him, so they tell Kiros to stick with him. They promise to hold it down in the city and wait for Kiros to return return when he's ready to take the city back from the Empire. Mahmut, finally up and moving, thanks Kiros' crew for having his back and helping him out. Elsewhere, Konstantinos is standing toe-to-toe with the Duchess. He's still running his mouth about his dumb ideas on how power should be used, but the Duchess quickly reminds him how weak his words are compared to those who actually hold real power. She slashes his shoulder first, letting him get a glimpse of his life flashing before his eyes, and then finishes him off. Apollodorus and the other senators show up to pledge their support to the Empire as the Phoenician War officially comes to an end. A few hours after sailing away from Phoenice, Mahmut and Kiros finally breathe easy, knowing they're out of enemy range. They keep sailing for another 4 hours or so until they run into the Venedic Armada fleet. At the same time, the captain of the fleet spots Mahmut and Kiros and orders his men to bring them aboard. When Kiros and the injured Mahmut arrive on deck, the captain introduces himself as Silvestro Brega and offers them asylum on his ship, honoring the alliance with Phoenice. But instead of taking the generous offer, Mahmut, ignoring his injuries, calls Brega out and demands to know why Venedic left Phoenice high and dry against the imperial soldiers. Brega starts mouthing off, claiming they never betrayed Phoenice. Turns out, they had made all the necessary preparations as soon as they got Phoenice's request, and set sail immediately. Mahmut calls BS and struggles to get his words out before collapsing into Abariga's arms. Abariga, another big shot on the fleet, steps in and has Mahmut taken to his quarters to recover over the next few days. As Mahmut gets the care he needs, he drifts off into sleep, replaying everything that went wrong. All Konstantinos did was trust the Doge of Venedic, Lucio, maybe a little too much. Is it really a crime to build diplomatic alliances based on trust? Is he missing something? Did something happen to Venedic that made them hesitate to help Phoenice? These questions keep swirling in Mahmut's mind, but he can't seem to find any answers. One thing's for sure, he still has a lot to learn. For now, Mahmut rests and wakes up a few days later. One morning, Kiros comes into Mahmut's room to feed Iskender, who's giving him a hard time and acting up. Mahmut lies in bed, wondering how the captain can stay so cool after betraying a 200-year-old alliance. Kiros doesn't have a solid answer either. Maybe the people of Venedic are just jerks by nature, but Mahmut's not the type to let that slide. His curiosity kicks in, and he's determined to figure out what really went down. His first step? Digging into any books he can find about Venedic's history. Lucky for him, there's one right where he's staying, so he grabs it and starts reading. So, Kiros is sneaking around and overhears a chat between Abariga and the captain. Once their little meeting wraps up, Kiros tails Abariga to the ship's railings and sees him toss a bouquet into the ocean, like some kind of tribute to Konstantinos, their fallen comrade in foolishness. Kiros thinks this is pretty cold-hearted toward an ally, so he confronts Abariga, demanding the truth. But Abariga just shrugs it off, saying he's only doing what the captain told him to do. Kiros heads back to Mahmut and spills everything he's found out. Mahmut mulls it over and asks Kiros if he's ever met Doge Lucio before. Kiros says, yeah, he met him when he was a kid, but back then, he didn't really care enough to figure out what his dad was talking about with the guy. Now though, it's obvious, they didn't give a damn about the agreement. Mahmut thanks Kiros for the intel and starts piecing together the details of the deal. Basically, Phoenice was supposed to boost Venedic's trade and economy, and in return, Venedic would back Phoenice with military support. If Doge Lucio had some other motive beyond trust, Mahmut was determined to figure out what it was. For days, Mahmut keeps jotting down his thoughts in his diary until he's finally strong enough to walk out onto the deck on his own. Breathing in that fresh sea air, he heads straight to Brega's quarters. He thanks Brega for all his help and asks for a small favor once they're back in Venedic. Mahmut wants Brega to set up a private meeting between him and Doge Lucio. Brega's cool with it and promises to make it happen. A few days later, they finally hit the shores of Venedic. Kiros tells Mahmut he's sticking around for the long haul because he's curious to see what kind of Pasha Mahmut will turn out to be. When they dock, Abariga gets them onto a small boat to sail over to the Doge's private crib. On the way, Abariga gives Mahmut a crash course on Venedic's history. Turns out, Venedic is kind of a melting pot. Most of the people there ended up on the land while running from war and captivity. Over time, they got rich and split themselves into 5 elemental groups: water, earth, fire, metal, and tree, so they could trace their roots. Abariga finally comes clean and introduces himself as the leader of Captain Brega's private militia. Mahmut gives him his respect and finally arrives at the Doge's place. Once there, Mahmut cuts to the chase and straight up asks the Doge why he betrayed Phoenice. Before Mahmut and Kiros rolled into Venedic, Doge Lucio made sure he got the lowdown on what went down during the Phoenician War. After hearing the usual updates, Doge Lucio got super curious about the Pasha, who's all about hating hating war. He invited Mahmut to hang out and have some meals with him for a few days before Mahmut headed back home. Now, with Mahmut standing right in front of him, the young Pasha isn't playing nice. He's all serious, demanding answers from Lucio about why Venedik left Konstantinos and Phoenike high and dry. Lucio listens, and then starts explaining the whole deal about Venedik and Phoenike's relationship. He brings up a clause in their treaty saying Venedik's army has to back up Phoenike in case of war, out of respect for all the economic support Phoenike's been giving them. But then, this slick doge points out that the treaty doesn't say the Venedik armada actually has to make it to Phoenike. Basically, the guy found a loophole and is riding it hard. Kiros loses his cool and calls Lucio out, saying he's a shady scammer for being so sneaky and stabbing an ally in the back. He points out that Phoenike fought hard for 17 days before falling to the Empire, which was plenty of time for the armada to show up. Mahmut steps in to calm Kiros down, and then asks Lucio what he thinks about the Empire taking over the Central Waters. Lucio, still smug, talk about the famous Venedik glass made from the crystal Phoenike exports every year. He figures Phoenike will keep exporting that crystal no matter who's in charge, so he doesn't see any reason to sweat the Empire taking over. He's confident he can just strike a new trade deal with them. Mahmut fires back, calling out how dirty the Empire plays and warning Lucio he might get played too, but Lucio just smirks and says he never trusted Phoenike in the first place. Mahmut then brings up Konstantinos' death at the hands of Imperial soldiers. That seems to hit Lucio a little since it's news to him, but he keeps his cool and brushes it off. He tells Mahmut there's no point in picking a fight with the Empire unless they come at Venedik first. If that happens, Venedik will strike back immediately. For now though, they're staying quiet. The two keep going back and forth over diplomacy and strategy until Lucio finally sends Mahmut off to enjoy what Venedik has to offer. As Mahmut and Kiros wander through the city, they chat about how the meeting went. Mahmut keeps his emotions in check, realizing that while Lucio's a selfish jerk who uses people, the guy's got some serious skills in playing the game. They decide to look for kulaks in the city, but just then, Abariga shows up and tells them there aren't any kulaks around. After catching up with them, he takes them to Brega's restaurant, which is now run by his wife. They sit down and start chatting about naval stuff on the Central Sea and how they divvy up their captains across different parts of the continent. After hearing all this talk about territories, Mahmut asks why there aren't any kulaks in the city. Abariga explains that it's because Venedik made it clear to Suleiman that they didn't need spies since they basically act as spies for every nation themselves. Back in the day, even when he was younger, Abariga managed to impress Suleiman with his skills, but Suleiman found himself in a weird spot when he realized there wasn't anyone in the city willing to betray their nation or show favoritism to another. After listening to Abariga's story, Kiros decides there's no reason to stick around in Venedik. Just as he's about to speak up, Brega's wife walks in and brings them more food. Kiros is so blown away by her beauty that he just sits there, staring at her in silence. The woman notices Kiros' awestruck face and starts talking about how much Abariga means to them. She explains that Abariga has been a slave passed around between masters since he was born, but one day, Brega saw his potential and bought him for 5 times the usual price just to have him. Now, Abariga has grown into a man of honor and class. She also mentions that Abariga is the one who scarred Brega's face and has been apologizing for it ever since. Before they can finish their meal, an alarm rings out in the distance, and it looks like a shipwreck has happened. Abariga gets up to see what's going on and finds out that a Kelowna company ship has sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Not long after, 3 fat merchants show up at the restaurant, demanding that Abariga pay back the money he borrowed to invest in the company. To make things worse, Brega shows up at the worst possible time and backs up their claims, making it seem like Abariga committed a huge crime. He sentences Abariga to exile. That night, Mahmut asks Abariga why he didn't tell the captain the real reason he invested the money. Abariga says he didn't want the captain to give him special treatment or bail him out because that would look bad to the people of Venedik. He says it's better this way. Soon after, Abariga is taken into custody. Before leaving, he thanks Mahmut for his help, hands him a map, and goes with the guards. A little later, Mahmut and Kiros are wandering the streets of Venedik at night when they overhear the 3 fat merchants bragging about how easy it was to trick Abariga and the captain. After hearing enough to confirm their guilt, Mahmut and his right-hand man confront them. They call them out on their lies and accuse them of setting Abariga up. Unfortunately, Venedik doesn't have any laws against lying or letting someone walk into a bad situation on purpose, so there's nothing Mahmut can do to punish them. Frustrated but determined, Mahmut decides to help Abariga. To do that, though, he comes up with a plan using military tactics. Meanwhile, Abariga checks in with the captain while stuck in the cell and asks Brega if keeping up this whole act is really worth it. Brega's like, totally worth it, because because they're curious to see what kind of Pasha Mahmut's gonna turn into. Meanwhile, Mahmut's out in Venedik, taking on 20 chess pros all at once in a big match. Dude plays like a boss and ends up winning 700 ducats in one go. But the chess masters? Yeah, they're pissed and start demanding their cash back. Brega's wife steps in, shuts them all down, and reminds them they're still in Brega's restaurant. Everyone pipes down and heads back to their business outside. Later, when Brega gets home, his wife tells him the kid they brought to the city has some serious guts. The next day, Mahmut pulls a power move and stops Abariga from being shipped off to some faraway place. He slaps down the 700 ducats and straight up buys Abariga from Brega. Abariga comes clean about the whole charade and apologizes. Mahmut's cool about it, accepts the apology, and lets Brega pitch Abariga to him. In the end, Mahmut buys him and brings him on board. After they leave the city, Lucio sails over to chat with Brega about Mahmut. Brega thinks Mahmut's young and green, but Lucio's convinced the kid's got what it takes to be a great pasha someday. He's hungry to learn and has the imagination to back it up. As they head off into the distance, Kiros asks Mahmut if he's really okay with the risk of Abariga spilling their secrets to Venedik. Mahmut's like, "It's a gamble I'm willing to take. We might need Venedik's help down the line." Just as Venedik fades from view, the bell from Foinike rings out, and Lucio mourns the loss of his best friend, Konstantinos. Mahmut shakes off the past and looks ahead, ready to dive into this new chapter with Abariga by his side. After the Foinike War wrapped up, the Baltrine Empire snagged control of another prime spot along the Centro trade route. To reward Duchess Lele for her role in winning the war, the emperor promises her half of all the taxes from the new territory. This move freaked out the nations in the Berlik-Torki Federation. About 13 days after Foinike fell, an emergency meeting, called a divan, was set up by the sultans of the 4 smaller nations, hosted by the main nation, Torki Pashalu. The big topic? Whether to adopt a motion Torki Pashalu had passed 12 years ago. At the divan, the 4 sultans, Balaban of Muzrak, Selim of Kuluch, Uzun of Bechke, and Fatma of Balta, each respected leaders of their regions, had to vote on the proposal. When the results came in, everyone was stunned. All 4 of them shot down the idea proposed by their father nation. Afterward, Zaganos and Suleiman sat down to figure out how to handle the brewing rebellion. Zaganos threw out the idea of just steamrolling the sultanates and merging all 4 smaller nations into one big Torkian union. Right then, Saluja Pasha, one of the softer, peace-loving types, showed up and warned Zaganos about the sultans possibly demanding equal rights and the freedom to make their own decisions. Saluja told him not to do anything rash, saying it could spark a civil war down the line. Zaganos listened to the guy for a bit, but once he left, Zaganos made up his mind. He wasn't going to waste time on the sultans when they needed to gear up for the empire's invasion, which could happen any day now. Meanwhile, Mahmut was out exploring the 4 smaller nations, learning about their history. This time, he was in Muzrak, hanging out in the town square, when a weapons dealer caught his eye. Abariga tipped him off, and they followed the dealer to a locked-up building. After checking out the layout, Abariga led Mahmut and their colleague through a maze of tunnels to sneak inside. They crawled their way to the inner chambers, took down a guard, and Mahmut introduced himself. Not long after, 2 important figures showed up. The first guy introduced himself as Bayazit, the brother of Sultan Balaban of Muzrak, and pointed to the sharp-looking woman next to him, calling her Princess Aish, daughter of Sultan Fatma of Balta. Bayazit also mentioned he was the Kulak, a kind of informant or spy, for the region, which surprised Mahmut. He asked why a sultan's brother would take on such a role, and Bayazid just said that's how things were. Aish, on the other hand, tried to mess with Mahmut, throwing shade to get under his skin, but Mahmut stayed calm and kept asking Bayazid why he was hiding out in the building. Bayazid spilled the tea about the recent divan, which also caught Mahmut off guard. Mahmut asked for a meeting with Bayazid's brother, but Bayazid warned him to be careful. His brother was unpredictable and dangerous. Still, Mahmut wasn't about to back down, so Bayazid gave him directions to find his brother, curious to see how things would play out. Mahmut and his crew finally roll up to Balaban's camp, where he spots the famous Yenicheri soldiers. Dude's blown away by how many troops Balaban's managed to pull together in such a short time, but he keeps his cool and asks for an audience with the Sultan anyway. Meanwhile, Bayazid catches wind of how stacked his brother's army is, and figures it's only a matter of time before they come for him, so he tells his guys to get ready to ditch the place and smoke them out before they show up. While that's going down, Mahmut heads into Balaban's tent, shows his respect, and straight up asks why Balaban bailed on the Berlik Torki. Mahmut reminds him that this temporary alliance ups their chances of survival if a big player like the Empire decides to invade. Balaban listens but then tells Mahmut his nation can go screw themselves. He's not about to let them treat his people like garbage. If they can't give his nation equal rights, they can deal with the Empire on their own. Mahmut asks if Balaban's looking to start a civil war, and Balaban's like, nah, I'm just gonna shut down anyone who opposes me. As for his brother, Bayezid, who's holed up in the water shrine, Balaban says he'll handle him soon enough. Before wrapping things up, Balaban asks Mahmut how he feels about Torki demoting him. He figures Mahmut should be pissed at his homeland for wasting his skills, but Mahmut keeps it chill and says he was young and clueless back then, so he deserved it. He still loves his country, betrayal or not. At that, Balaban stands up and decides he's done playing nice. He's never gonna bow to Torki's demands. Period. And as for Bayezid, he's a total embarrassment, and Balaban's dead set on taking him down. When they roll up to the shrine, Balaban calls out Bayezid and Aish, labeling them traitors and enemies of the state. Mahmut asks why he's dragging Aish into this, and Balaban spills the tea about her trying and failing to overthrow her mom in a coup. Kiros leans over to Mahmut, wishing they could just bounce while they're wasting time with Balaban. Then, when the moment's right, Balaban torches the whole water shrine. Inside, Bayezid and Aish fire up some water-sucking contraption to make their escape. After pulling off this shady move, Balaban formally invites Mahmut to chill at his quarters. Meanwhile, Suleiman gets a letter from Mahmut breaking down everything that went down in the city. When Zaganos hears about Bayezid's recent death, he starts scheming for the next Divan meeting. This time, he pitches an idea to the 13 Pashas. Use some disposable pawn to take down the 4 Sultanate stratocracies. That way, even if the assassin gets caught, it won't trace back to Torki Pashalu. Saluja jumps up to call him out, saying the plan's cowardly and dumb, but Zaganos claps back, reminding everyone they don't have time to waste since they need to get ready for the Empire. Saluja suggests meeting the demands of the 4 nations to smooth things over, but Zaganos isn't buying it. Saluja keeps running his mouth until Zaganos shuts him down, saying the satellite nations don't care about the Federation anymore. If the Pashas trust him with the job, Zaganos promises to see it through. That night, Zaganos gets the green light to set up the coup. He picks Mahmut, a low-level soldier who's easy to sacrifice, to pull it off and take down all 4 sultans before time runs out. He fills Suleiman in on the plan and explains his reasons. Suleiman catches on to the political move and heads off to Muzrak. Meanwhile, Mahmut keeps checking out Balaban's palace. His guys, Kiros and Abiriga, get distracted by the fancy fountain and wander off to take a closer look, leaving Mahmut behind. Later, when night falls, they all chow down on some food. After dinner, the 3 of them sneak out of the palace, quietly taking out a bunch of guards on their way to the gates. Eleanor spots Balaban leaving his quarters and asks why he hasn't dealt with Mahmut yet. Balaban brushes her off, saying not to sweat it. He's got plans for that kid. While Mahmut and his crew slip out through the sewers disguised as Yenicheri soldiers, Balaban and his men discover the missing guards and sound the alarm. Mahmut thinks about trying to talk things out with Balaban, but they all know it's way too late for that. Instead, they sneak into the next Yenicheri roll call, which Balaban is leading, and try to stay under the radar. Balaban starts calling out names, and everything's fine until he gets to Mahmut and Kiros. He doesn't spot Abiriga right away, but eventually figures it out. When he catches Mahmut, Balaban lets him know how disappointed he is, and vows to burn his face to a crisp. Right then, the fountain nearby goes haywire, and Abiriga uses the water to put out the torches. He takes advantage of the chaos to take down all the guards in the courtyard, including Balaban, and helps his crew escape back into the sewers. Mahmut and the gang keep moving through the sewers until they finally run into Eleanor and Rod Orm at the other end. Eleanor kicks things off by telling Mahmut she's been waiting to see him for a while. Mahmut and his crew eventually figure out that Louis, the Empire's minister, is mixed up in the shady moves of the 4 stratocracies. After hearing Mahmut's take on it, Eleanor decides it's a bad idea to let him live. Mahmut's down for the fight and promises to go all out against her fancy lackeys. Eleanor drops her superior attitude, pulls out her long, flexible sword, and gets ready to throw down. Mahmut teams up with his crew and his eagle, Iskender, to not only take Eleanor's weapon, but also shut down the other assassins. With his blade to Eleanor's neck, Mahmut glares at her skinny, annoying self and warns her not to mess with him again. He's beaten her twice now, and there won't be a third time. Next time, she's dead for real. Eleanor tries to stall by begging for her life, But when Mahmut starts trash-talking her boss, Louis, she snaps back. Eventually, Balaban and his Yenikaris roll in to grab Balaban. While Mahmut's distracted, Eleanor slips out of his grip and barely escapes with her life. Mahmut and his squad lay low in a corner, waiting for a miracle. Just when things are looking grim, Suleiman shows up with Bayezid and Aish, the not-so-bright duo, to save the day. Mahmut joins them and manages to get away from Balaban. During the after-action report with Suleiman, Mahmut makes it clear that Balaban's a stubborn pain in the ass who's impossible to deal with. As long as Balaban's running Muzrak, the Brillik-Torki Federation is a no-go. After hearing Mahmut out, Suleiman fills him in on the Divan's plan to make Mahmut the leader of the anti-Sultan rebellion. If Mahmut agrees, his job will be to take down all 4 sultans within a set time. Kiros smells something fishy and calls them out for using Mahmut as a scapegoat for their shady schemes. Mahmut gets up and asks Bayezid and Aish if they're cool with the plan. They give him the green light, so Mahmut nods and agrees to take on the Divan's mission. Meanwhile, back in Torki, Saluja Pasha is busy calling out Zaganos for deciding to overthrow the sultans. Zaganos ignores him at first, but eventually snaps and calls Saluja a clueless idealist who doesn't get how the real world works. After riding off, Saluja decides he's gonna handle things his own way. The next morning, Mahmud and his new crew head to another sultanate to kick off their mission. On the way, Mahmud names Bayezid and Aish as pro-Torki leaders for Muzrak and Balta. For now, the plan's only halfway done. They still need leaders for Buchak and Kuluch. Mahmud racks his brain trying to figure out who can take over once the current sultans are booted. Suleiman keeps them moving until they reach Buchak's capital, where they spot wanted posters with their faces plastered everywhere. Since walking into the city isn't an option, Suleiman disguises himself and Mahmud as a married couple to sneak in. Luckily, the plan works, and they make it into Buchak's capital. As they wander through the city, Suleiman explains a business deal that'll go down the drain if the Berlik-Torki falls apart. By night, Zaganos gets a message from Suleiman, updating him on their latest moves. Around that time, Suleiman takes Mahmud and the crew to check out this new road the Buchak engineers are working on. It's supposed to link the Empire and Buchak and double as a trade hotspot between the two. If they finish this road, Buchak can finally sell their gems for way more cash than they're getting now. When Mahmud hears this, he figures out the Empire's plan. They're trying to buy Buchak with money. If this road gets done before they take out the 4 current sultans, Birlik-Torki could be toast. To stop that from happening, Mahmud splits the group into 2 teams, one to handle Buchak and the other to deal with the Sultan in Kuluch. Aish volunteers for the Kuluch squad since she knows the Sultan there. After hearing this, Mahmud tells Suleiman and Bayezid to find a leader for Buchak while the rest head to Kuluch. By sunrise, they roll into Kuluch and meet Aisha's fiancé, Prince Orhan. But this guy's a total wimp with the guts of a clueless fool. Seriously, he's so spineless his wife has to keep him in check. Anyway, Mahmud and his crew settle into the villa, and Orhan serves them some fresh fruit. Aish skips the nonsense and straight up asks Orhan to hook her up with a meeting with his dad. Orhan warns her it's risky since even he barely remembers what his dad looks like. Dude's always wearing a mask. But Aish couldn't care less about that. Eventually, they score a meeting with Salim. Mahmud tells his team not to kill Salim when they get the chance. He wants to figure out why the guy's always in a mask. Soon, they meet Salim himself, who greets them and keeps it real. Salim and Aish throw some sarcastic jabs at each other, with Aish reminding him how weak his nation is compared to the other sultanates. Salim fires back, saying he's tight with Balaban and has no beef with him. Then Salim calls his men in and they draw their swords on Mahmud and the crew. Not wanting things to get messy, Mahmud de-escalates the situation but starts suspecting something's off about Salim's attitude. Maybe the Empire has spies keeping tabs on him. Either way, Salim orders his men to lock Mahmud and the squad in the 9th tower until Balaban shows up. After they're thrown in the tower, the spies reveal themselves, and Mahmud realizes his hunch was spot on. While Prince Orhan bawls over his dad's betrayal, Abiriga finds a weak spot in the tower and tells Mahmud about it. Just then, a hidden door swings open, and Salim shows his real face. First, he apologizes for acting weird earlier, explaining that betraying Berlik-Torki was a tough pill to swallow. He's now on board with whatever Mahmud's planning and lets him know. Since his nation's tiny with zero military or economic power, there's not much he can do to stand up to the other 3 sultanates. Aish comes up with a sneaky new plan to help their coup succeed. If Salim can pull off a wedding with the prince, they can gather all the sultans in one room and take them out at once. If the sultans don't show up, they'll just go ahead with the marriage and stir up trouble later. Selim's totally on board, so he jumps into planning the very next day. After sending out the invites the following morning, Mahmut and Abiriga chat about the chance that Kuluch might cut a side deal to benefit themselves. Mahmut keeps his options open and asks Aish if she's cool marrying someone she doesn't love. Aish, impressed by Mahmut's smarts, tells him she's been trained to handle arranged marriages without any drama. Plus, the guy she likes might not even like her back, so no point stressing over it. Meanwhile, miles away, Suleiman and Bayazid are on the run after Buchak's soldiers spot them. Around the same time, Beyoğlu Ismail, one of Uzun's 45 sons, shows up with gifts from far-off lands for his dad. After the pleasantries, Ismail notices some shady characters causing trouble and asks his dad for permission to deal with them before things get out of hand. Uzun gives him the green light, and Ismail hires the Orquesta mercenaries to capture Suleiman and Bayazid. Once he's got them, Ismail has a talk with them and admits he's on their side, preferring to be under the protection of the Berlik Torki. Suleiman agrees with his plan and waits for him to take the next step. Ismail asks what Torki Pashalu can offer to make the rebellion work. Suleiman lists a few weak resources, which Ismail finds disappointing. They'll need way more than 5,000 men from Kuluch to take on the 23,000 soldiers from the other three sultanates. Bayazid steps in, stopping Ismail from making a rash choice, and asks him to follow him somewhere to reveal a secret he's been keeping. Ismail agrees and finally gets to see Bayazid's hidden weapon, the Sharkiye, and it's not just one, there are 77 of them. Blown away, Ismail immediately teams up with Bayazid to rebel against his father. Before diving back into the main story, we get a little flashback that shows how Bayazid and Aisha's love story started blooming. From the looks of it, Aisha's totally head over heels for Bayazid. Back in the day, Balaban was with them in the forest when he realized just how sharp Bayazid really was. That same day, Balaban made a deal with Bayazid to always have his back and use all the smarts he's got to help make Muzrak great again. Fast forward to now, the three of them are just sitting there, lost in thought, reminiscing about those sweet old times. A few days later, the Pashas of Torki Pashalu hold a big meeting, called a divan, to talk about Mahmut's plan to boot out the current sultans of the four satellite nations. Some of the Pashas, who are all about war, are totally on board with the idea, but others, including some pacifists, and a few clueless idiots, are against it. Then there's Saluja, basically the king of all idiots, who stands up and asks the head pasha to let him represent Torki Pashalu at the wedding. Surprisingly, the head pasha says yes, and Saluja thanks him. As Saluja and his crew leave the capital, Zagano sees them off, fully aware that the head pasha just sent them on a one-way trip to disaster. Not that anyone's surprised, Saluja kinda had it coming. Next up, Mahmut and his squad roll into Akayep, the capital of Kuluch, to meet with Beyoğlu Ismail and chat up the wedding plan. Ismail's cool with Mahmut's plan overall, but he suggests they let the wedding happen without any drama or assassinations. Then, once Orhan becomes sultan, they can use Kuluch's army to take on the other three nations. Mahmut's not feeling it though. He's worried a civil war will leave people too divided. Ismail challenges him, asking how he plans to get people to look past the assassination, and Mahmut tells him to meet him at the Circle Plaza in 3 nights. 3 nights later, Ismail and the other Torkians show up at the Circle Plaza for a stage play. The play basically paints the current sultans as evil villains who've been buddying up with the empire. The play goes on for a while and eventually wraps up. Afterward, Mahmut and Ismail see the plan starting to come together. Mahmut takes a moment to thank Shara and her crew for helping him pull it off, and he asks them to keep performing the play for 6 more months if something happens to him. Shara brushes him off, telling him to quit being dramatic and focus on staying alive. Later that night, Mahmut breaks down some of his plans to Kiros, explaining that they'll need the people's support if things go sideways. Meanwhile, Abiriga chats with Aish about what'll go down if the sultans don't show up to her wedding. If that happens, Orhan will take over as sultan and use military force to get the other nations in line. Aish, feeling all proud and confident, assumes Balaban's just going to sit back and let it all play out. Talk about bad timing. Balaban is spotted chatting it up with Saluja, the idiot who actually thought he was some kind of saint. Saluja spills the tea, telling Balaban that the divan suspects he's been cutting deals with the empire to take them down. Balaban, being the smooth operator he is, pats Saluja on the shoulder, thanks him for snitching, and says he'll bring his 10,000 Yenicheris to the wedding. Saluja, thinking Balaban's a stand-up guy, heads back to his room, clueless. That night, Balaban can't shake the memory of his dad's death. Turns out, his father got played as a pawn in one of Torquay's political games. Furious at the Berlik Torquay, Balaban's been itching for payback, so he orders his crew to tell the sultans of Buchak and Balta to gear up their armies. His plan? March to Kuluch and smash them to pieces. Meanwhile, word gets out about Saluja's betrayal, and the Divan jumps on the opportunity. Bayuk Pasha, instead of calling Saluja out for being a total fool, decides to one-up Balaban. While Balaban's off chasing ghosts in Kuluch, Buyuk plans to hit his unprotected homeland. As usual, Zaganos backs him up, and Buyuk hands over control of the armies to Zaganos to get the ball rolling. On the other side of things, Balaban's chilling with Fatma in her carriage, talking about the war that's about to go down. Mahmut and his crew are busy strategizing how to position themselves at the wedding to make sure everything's set for taking out all the sultans. Meanwhile, Aisha's trying on her wedding dress but isn't thrilled about it. She's annoyed she can't handle a sword in such a fancy, heavy gown. Bayazit shows up and offers to help her train outside, and she's all for it. During their private training session, Aish starts reminiscing about the good times she used to have with Bayazit. When they're done training, they sit together, watching the sunset, and open up about their biggest dreams. That's when it hits Aish. Bayazit felt the same way she did. Back in the day, they both figured they'd end up marrying each other, but now, that ship sailed. Poor Orhan overhears the whole convo between his fiancée and her uncle. The guy's heart shatters, and he runs off to cry in some dark corner. His dad, Salim, finds him bawling on the stairs, looking totally pathetic. Salim gives him a pep talk, telling him to quit being a crybaby and step up his game if he wants Aish to actually fall for him. Orhan takes the advice to heart and swears he's gonna change. As the wedding prep heats up, Aish gives Mahmut a ring to remind him why the Torquian government picked him for this gig. Mahmut lets her know he's totally clued in on the danger and says he's ready to face it head on. Bayazit, meanwhile, gets a little salty seeing Mahmut's determination, which reminds him of the day he found out his brother betrayed the Torquian alliance. That betrayal crushed Bayazit. His heart broke, and he was gutted his brother chose the wrong road. If push comes to shove, Bayazit's ready to do whatever it takes to save Muzrak, even if it means taking out his own brother. The next day rolls around in a flash, and the city of Kuluch is buzzing, getting ready for the big festivities. Just as the ceremony's about to kick off, Mahmut gets a heads up from Zaganos. There's an army heading their way. Mahmut scopes out the land and spots 20,000 soldiers making their way toward Kuluch. Wasting zero time, he orders Kiros to start evacuating the townsfolk while Abariga and Suleiman scramble to make sure Sultan Selim is safe from the Empire's agents. With the orders flying, Mahmut shifts focus to fine-tuning his assassination plan. Meanwhile, over in the palace, the Sultan's in his son's room, ready to kill him and have his head served up on a stake for the prince. Orhan begs his dad for mercy, but Aish steps in, sword drawn, ready to throw down with the soldiers. Ismail, Bayazit, and the rest of the crew gear up for battle as they rush to the palace's military quarters. Aish and her soon-to-be hubby get overwhelmed, forcing Orhan to grab a knife and hold his dad hostage to stop the guards from taking out his fiancée. Elsewhere, Abariga and Suleiman track down and eliminate the Empire's agents. As they make their way to Selim's room, Orhan faces a new curveball. His dad asks if he's ready to abandon their small nation to fight Balaban and risk total destruction. Orhan, looking like the biggest idiot of the century, admits he doesn't know much about war or politics like his dad. The Sultan, fed up with his son's cluelessness, shoves him aside and goes after Aish. But before he can strike, Orhan steps up, stabs his dad in the back, and saves Aish. Selim, accepting his son's choice, tells him to stay strong because he's about to become the new sultan. Right then, Abariga and Suleiman show up and find Selim in Orhan's arms. Meanwhile, Mahmut's struggling to get Kuluch's 5,000-strong army in line. The cocky captain refuses to move without hearing from the sultan first, unwilling to risk his men for the looming battle. They're about to make a colossal mistake when Orhan finally grows a pair and takes charge like a boss. Flashing his father's mask, he lets the captain know he's killed the sultan and orders him to follow Mahmut's lead. The captain, realizing Orhan's the new sultan, falls in line, and Mahmut gets the backup he needs. To get why there's beef between Balaban and Bayazit, we flash back to see what went down. Turns out, Bayazit's love for his bro went south when he caught him cutting deals with that Empire douchebag Louis. Before Bayazit even rolls up to his brother's crib, Louis is already there, making his moves. Dude smooth-talking the Sultan of Muzrak, offering fake sympathy for the Empire killing his dad, and then then whips out this map he's been working on. It's drawn on some old school papyrus, and when Balaban checks it out, he notices it's way different from the maps he's used to. Louis tells him to take a closer look and spills the tea. This map shows the future of Rumeliana. Basically, if everything goes according to Louis's plan, Muzrak will finally get its independence, Balaban's ultimate dream. Bayazit shows up late and catches his bro grinning at the map like it's the best thing ever. Right then and there, Bayazit knows Balaban's about to sell out. Not wanting to get caught on the losing side, Bayazit sneaks off to Zaganos and asks to be made a kulak of Muzrak. Zaganos grills him for a bit to figure out what he's really after. Eventually, Zaganos gives him the green light, and Bayazit becomes the new kulak of the city. Fast forward to August 31st, year 75 on the Torquay calendar. Balaban and 2 other sultans pull their armies together and surround the city of Kuluch. Meanwhile, Orhan and his crew are gearing up for a siege and hit up Mahmut for advice. But Mahmut's like, nah, forget the siege prep. Let's switch it up. He shows them a message from the divan saying they're supposed to act like decoys to keep the 3 nations busy, while Zaganos and his squad swoop in and snag the other cities. Mahmut's not about to let Kuluch get wrecked, just so Zaganos can take the easy road to victory. Even so, the enemies got them outnumbered 4-1. During a quick war meeting with Ismail and Bayazit, Mahmut gets intel from Suleiman about Ismail's hidden soldiers armed with sharkyes. Mahmut realizes this fight might force bros to go head-to-head, and if it comes to that, they've got to make sure they're on the winning team, no matter what. Bayazit chimes in, saying it's cool to take his brother out if needed. He's over him anyway. Mahmut makes sure everyone's on the same page before they roll out. When the time comes, they hit the front lines, ready to throw down and bring home the win. Balaban, on the flip side, takes a sec to think back to the time he dealt with that fool Saluja, whose pie-in-the-sky ideas landed him in deep trouble. Balaban gave him props for the heads up that saved him from getting wrecked by Mahmut. But as payback for being such a moron, Balaban offs Saluja and gets rid of him for good. With the sounds of battle booming across the plains, Balaban snaps back to the present to face his enemy. He notices Mahmut's crew is pretty small and starts looking for his brother. When he spots Bayazit, he figures wiping them out with his full 20,000 troops would be overkill, so he pulls out just 5,000 men to match Mahmut's squad and charges into battle. Mahmut catches on to Balaban's move and thanks Bayazit for sticking with them to the end. Then, he tells Ismail to ride off and hide in their planned spot. With that squared away, Mahmut gets his troops into formation. He clocks that Balaban's the big boss of all 23,000 soldiers, so if he wants to win, he's got to take Balaban down and leave the rest of the army useless. Mahmut goes with a super simple battle strategy, which Balaban figures out almost immediately. Realizing how basic and weak the setup is, Balaban goes all in, charging straight at Mahmut's forces. Mahmut tries to throw him off by using tree branches tied to horses to create a distraction, but Balaban doesn't fall for it. He keeps chasing Mahmut, thinking he's got this in the bag. Once Balaban is drawn in far enough, Mahmut orders his horsemen with tree branches to kick up a massive dust cloud, messing with Balaban's vision. It mostly works, as Balaban's troops drift further away from the rest of the 18,000 soldiers. When they're far enough, one cocky captain from earlier breaks off from the main group. The 18,000 men try to follow, but they get ambushed by spear-wielding troops hiding in the galleys. Orhan notices the dust cloud and knows it's time to move to phase 2 of the plan. He signals his men to form a reverse bow shape, and they snap into position fast. Meanwhile, the rest of the Kuluch army fakes a retreat, giving Mahmut's battalion the chance to catch up to Balaban's forces and hit them from both sides. With the dust cloud still swirling, Uzun asks Fatma if they should send in their troops. But Fatma, knowing her brother, decides not to disrespect his pride. Mahmut pushes through Balaban's elite Yenikeris, crushing and killing most of them. By the time Balaban realizes what's happening, it's too late. Over half of his prized Yenikeris are dead and gone. When the dust finally settles, Mahmut steps up and tells Balaban to retreat while he still can, or he'll meet his end by Mahmut's sword. But Balaban, too proud to back down, brushes off Mahmut's warning. Instead, he rallies the remaining Yenikeris, firing them up to keep fighting for their nation. His pep talk works, and the Yenikeris charge at the enemy again. Kiros and a chunk of Kuluch's men fall back to the nearby ravines, luring Balaban into a trap set by Ismail. Blinded by his pride, Balaban chases them into the ravines, totally clueless about what's waiting for him. Bayazid and Ismail gear up with their Sharkyeh weapons and start blasting Balaban's crew as soon as they're deep enough in the ravine. After the first round of shots, Ismail orders his guys to block Balaban's escape routes by rolling massive boulders to seal off the front and back of his army. With that that done, the Sharkyei squad gets ready to fire again. Meanwhile, Ismail has his men shoot arrows at Balaban's army to soften them up for the next surprise. Balaban's crew goes into turtle formation to shield themselves from the arrows. As they move toward what they think might be a way out, Balaban starts realizing he seriously underestimated Mahmut. Before he can figure out a way to fix things, Bayezid and his Sharkyei crew let loose another round, wiping out most of Balaban's men. After surviving the second wave, Balaban notices Sharkyei shells on the ground, and finally puts 2 and 2 together. This has to be Bayezid's doing. He's hit with a wave of regret and betrayal, not believing his own brother would go this far. Balaban quickly tells his men to get out of the trap before Bayezid and his crew can reload, but it's too late. Bayezid's already set to fire the third round. This time, he makes sure to hit Balaban twice, once in the chest, and yeah, probably in the nuts. Even with 2 shells in him, Balaban, like the absolute tank he is, charges at Bayezid, still trying to take him down. He demands to know why his brother betrayed him, right up until the bitter end. Bayezid tells him it's because he's not fit to be Sultan. He got way too hyped when Lua, backstabbing snake from the Empire, gave him what he wanted. Bayezid says he knew it would come to this because Balaban is so damn stubborn and emotional. Balaban drops his knife and asks if Bayezid remembers when he said he'd love him forever. Bayezid holds his brother's fading body and tells him he's loved him since they were kids. As the sun sets on August 31st, Balaban dies on the battlefield, leaving the title of Sultan to his brother, Bayezid. Back on the battlefield, Uzun, the big fat loser, gets sick of waiting around for Balaban to give the go-ahead. Dude's had enough and rallies his army, ready to go all in and wipe out what's left of Orhan's forces. Abariga and Orhan know what Uzun's up to, but they play it cool, waiting for Mahmut to show up with proof that Balaban's been taken out. If Mahmut can finish the job, the war's done and dusted. Meanwhile, Abariga's trying to keep Orhan from losing his cool and doing something dumb, but it's tough for Orhan to chill when he's losing a ton of his guys every time Uzun attacks. Just when things are looking grim, Princess Aish rides out of the castle with the domestic guards in tow. Orhan sees her from a distance and realizes she's planning to fight Uzun's crew with guards who've probably never even been in a real fight. Aish doesn't give a damn though. She throws them into the fray to buy Mahmut and Bayezid more time to finish their mission. Uzun catches onto her plan pretty quickly. Pissed off at her gutsy move, he orders his men to take her out. Orhan, freaking out, yells out for Aish, hoping she'll be okay. Out of nowhere, Iskender shows up like a total hero and saves her from getting killed. Not long after, Mahmut rolls in with Balaban's head, making it clear the dude's dead. Uzun immediately freaks out and bails from the fight, running off like the coward he is. Turns out, the only guy who gave him the guts to fight was Balaban, and now that he's gone, Uzun's got nothing left. He retreats to his castle to figure out his next move with the Empire. Meanwhile, Fatma hears about the chaos and starts making plans to skip town before she gets caught up in it. As night falls, Mahmut and his crew are pumped to see Uzun retreating. Instead of chasing him, they let him and his men head back the way they came. Uzun, being the genius he is, lets his ragtag mercenaries lead him through the ravines again. Little does he know, Bayezid and Ismail, one of Uzun's sons, are hiding there, waiting for him to show up. They let Uzun and his beaten down soldiers get deep into the ravines before making their move. When the time's right, they scare the soldiers off with a sneak attack, and the whole crew bolts, leaving Uzun behind. Before Ismail takes care of business, Bayezid asks him if he's ready to kill his own dad. Ismail doesn't even flinch. He calls his dad a coward and a fat piece of trash with zero morals. Plus, if he takes his dad out now and claims the throne, none of his siblings can challenge him for it. Once the coast is clear, Ismail gets down into the ravine and finishes his dad off quicker than your dad's time in bed. Meanwhile, Mahmut and his crew corner Fatma and her squad in another part of the ravines. After scaring the living daylights out of them, they mess up big time and hand their sultan right over to Mahmut. He takes Fatma back to the castle and locks her up. Over dinner, he talks with his new allies about what kind of punishment someone like her deserves. They're worried that if they straight up kill her, the kid who's next in line for the throne might flip out and mess up their plans. Kiros asks the princess why Fatma brought the boy to the battlefield, and Aish explains that he's safer with his mom than left alone in the palace. Then she starts telling everyone this story about how her mom, Sultan Fatma, became ruler after her dad died. Fatma was supposed to stay in charge until the boy was old enough to take over. Some relatives, like her uncle Qasim, weren't cool with this, but Balaban took him out before he could cause too much trouble. After hearing all this, Orhan, Aish's future husband, tries to stick up for Fatma, but Aish shuts him down, saying they can't let her off the hook. After dinner, Mahmut visits Fatma and tells her she'll be executed at sundown with a painless poison. Fatma accepts her fate and asks if her son Kamal will be killed too. To everyone's surprise, Mahmut says no. Kamal is supposed supposed to inherit the throne of Balta when the time comes. Until then, Aish will run things in his place until he's old enough to rule at 15. Fatma feels a little better hearing this. Kamal, though, can tell something's up with his mom, so he rushes to Mahmut, begging him to spare her because she hasn't done anything wrong. He even goes to Aish, asking her to show some mercy, but she tells her bratty little brother there's nothing she can do to change the decision. Furious, Kamal storms back to his mom and swears he'll avenge her if they go through with the plan. At dawn, Mahmut gives Fatma a drink, and she takes a sip, ready to die. But when the sun is fully up, Mahmut calls off the execution and lets her live. Ismail and Bayazit confront him about it, and Mahmut explains what's at stake. If Kamal loses his mom, he'll never forgive them, and all their efforts will be for nothing. To keep Fatma safe, Mahmut promises to set her up in a house on the edge of the city, where she'll stay until the end of her days. Suleiman steps up and asks what Mahmut will do if the Divan objects. Mahmut straight up says he doesn't care what they think. It's his victory, and he'll handle the new sultans however he wants. From that moment, a legend was born. Later, Orhan throws a tantrum like a spoiled kid, crying as he says goodbye to Aish, his fiancée. Aish eventually tells him to stop being such a baby and man up so she can actually respect him enough to marry him. Orhan finally pulls himself together and lets her go. That afternoon, word of the successful coup reaches Zaganos and the other sore losers, who are willing to spill innocent blood to cling to power. The new sultans pay their respects as they all gather in the capital of Torquay. He's not sweating this whole situation as long as the civil war doesn't mess with the empire. He rolls up to the emperor and straight up tells him to get the troops ready because they're gonna hit Torquay soon. Meanwhile, Abariga and Kiros are chatting about how Mahmut would get his Pasha title back at the next Divan, since they think he's done enough good to earn it. At the next Divan, Mahmut gets a shout out from Boyuk himself, who later asks if he wants to reclaim his Pasha title. Mahmut picks up on the vibe. They're testing his loyalty to Torquay. Before giving an answer, he flashes back to a convo with Ismail, where he was venting about pointless bloodshed and all that. Ismail had told him, "Look, soldiers are gonna die for a good cause, and whether you like it or not, they're stoked to see their dreams come true." The new sultans also promised to hustle hard to make Mahmut's dream a reality. With all that in mind, Mahmut takes his title back. Later that day at the Divan, some poor guy starts whining about losing 7,000 men in the civil war and freaking out about what to do if the empire attacks. Mahmut steps up and suggests they hit the empire first with a preemptive strike. Even Zaganos is caught off guard by this bold move. Mahmut fires up the room, telling them to believe in themselves and pointing out a few advantages they've got over the empire. His speech even gets Halil Pasha on board. Halil stands up and smooth talks the group into letting Mahmut become the first minister of foreign affairs. That night, Mahmut and Zaganos have this awkward run-in in the castle courtyard. Mahmut thanks Zaganos for picking him and Suleiman to be key players in his spy network. He tries to hand back the pyramids, but Zaganos doesn't take them. Instead, he tells Mahmut to make everyone proud. Mahmut thanks him again and heads off to meet up with his crew to keep doing what they do best. On their next trip, Mahmut and his crew roll into this big-shot merchant city that's got ties to the east. They meet up with one of the top dogs in town, Lord Ramanov, Ram for short, to pitch an idea. Mahmut wants Ram to help Torquay Pashalu trade with the eastern part of the continent, but Ram's not feeling it. He straight up shuts Mahmut down, saying he's not about to risk his rep with other nations just to help Torquay. Then, like it's no big deal, Ram kicks Mahmut out of his castle and goes on with his day. On their way back, Mahmut and his crew stumble across some drama in the streets. A girl named Hanum Nikki is causing a scene after a trade deal went sideways. Turns out, she wanted her goods back because they meant something to her. This dude Idris, who used to work for her dad's company, bailed on her to join the competition right after her dad passed away. He didn't think Hanum was cut out to run the business. Hanum's not having it and lets Idris know exactly how she feels. But Idris, being a total jerk, fires back with some trash talk, saying she's nothing compared to her dad and blaming her dad for dying in the first place. That's the last straw for Hanum. She snaps and beats the crap out of Idris before one of his guards steps in to stop her. Idris, still being a tool, gets up and keeps running his mouth about her dad, leaving Hanum in tears. That night, Hanum's wandering the streets with nowhere to go and no business to run. She's just aimlessly walking around, looking like she's hit rock bottom. She cries her eyes out until she decides to chuck her dad's necklace and give up completely. But right before she does, Mahmut shows up with a new plan. Hanum gets a little feisty, but Abiriga calms her down. Mahmut shows her some stunning Torquian jewelry and promises her a fresh start if she's willing to ditch her dead-end city and join his crew. Hanum doesn't even hesitate, she's in. She listens to Mahmut's pitch and agrees to roll with them to make their plans happen. The next day, Mahmut, Kiros, and Abiriga all dress up as women and team up with Hanum to sell their jewelry in the city streets. Kiros is totally grossed out by his new look, but Idris and his crew are straight up stunned to see Hanum back on her feet after hitting rock bottom the day before. For Hanum, this is her big turning point, and she's not looking back. That night, Mahmut asks Hanum if there's any way they can break into the Eastern market like the city's top 3 merchants. Hanum says it's going to be tough since those guys have been making life hard for other merchants for years. When Mahmut explains why he's so set on dealing with Chenili, he says it's because they're thriving and easy for the Empire to notice. That jogs Hanum's memory about a guy from Chenili who buys weird stuff from Rumeriana for the Chenili Emperor. The next day, Mahmut and his crew, including Hanum, roll up to the guy's villa and find him chilling in his birthday suit. Hanum introduces the dude as Wang Yixin from Chenili, and they all settle down in the dining room to sip some tea and chat. Mahmut listens to Wang's backstory, how he got to where he is now, trying to figure out what kind of guy he's dealing with. Once he's got all the info he needs, Mahmut pulls out a fancy Venetian glass cup and asks Wang if he can hook him up with 10,000 of these to send to Chenili through his connections. Wang hears him out but turns him down and is about to end the meeting. Mahmut, not backing down, promises to bring peace to Chenili if Wang can make it happen. Seeing Mahmut's determination, Wang suddenly has a change of heart. He remembers the Chenili Emperor's son's upcoming birthday and throws out a counteroffer. He'll buy 400,000 boxes of the glass from the Nikki caravan. They shake on it, and both parties head off happy. Later that evening, Wang is out on the balcony with his wife, explaining why he made the deal. He talks about how aggressive the Balt Rhine Empire is, and says he'd rather work with a sharp guy like Mahmut from Torquay than deal with those jerks from the Empire. A few days later, Mahmut and his crew get shipments of the Venetian glass and start loading them onto caravans for distribution. Ram asks Wang what's up with all the glass, and Wang explains it's for the prince's birthday. Ram just grins and gives him the green light to keep doing his thing, but then they hit a snag. The cushioning materials for the packaging don't show up on time. That night, they're stressing over the cushion issue, but Mahmut tells them not to sweat it. He's got it under control. Sure enough, a few days later, Venedict starts loading up 200,000 boxes of cushioning materials onto ships to send to the merchant cities. Brega oversees the whole operation, and Doge Lucio gives him a big thank you for handling it. To mess with the Empire's plans even more, Brega heads to Theros and offers to buy their wheat supply at 5 times the usual price. The greedy ruler of Theros jumps at the offer, selling off the wheat without a second thought about his deal with the Empire. When Louis hears about it, he's pissed. Another one of his schemes down the drain. The Duchess rubs salt in the wound by calling him incompetent, but Louis brushes it off and starts plotting. He sets up a fleet in Foinike to ambush and steal the wheat from Theros' ships. The Empire's forces in Foinike get the orders, but are dragging their feet. Eventually, they get moving and attack the incoming Venetian fleet from Theros. Brega tries to avoid a fight, and even the Empire's fleet captain isn't eager to throw down, but some hot-headed rookie charges in, kicking off a battle that drags on for days. In the end, Venedict's navy comes out on top and captures Ryan Law, an old and worn-out guy from Venedict. Mahmut hears about all this and finally reveals his master plan, to pit Venedict and the Empire against each other. Since Venedict just became their ally, Mahmut speeds things up by getting Venedict to indirectly betray the Empire. Abiriga is blown away by Mahmut's cleverness and tells him so. Mahmut thanks Hanum for her help in pulling it all off. Hanum, touched, asks to join his crew and travel the world with them. Mahmut happily agrees, welcoming her aboard for their next mission to prevent the war. Around October 24th in the year 75 of the Torquian calendar, the Empire struck a deal with Venedict. The deal was simple. Venedict would let the Empire sail through their waters with wheat they'd bought from Theros. But just 3 days after sealing the deal, a couple of Empire ships carrying that wheat to Foinike got wrecked by pirates in Venedict's waters. And guess what? Venedict didn't lift a damn finger to help. They basically left the Empire hanging. Lele, the Duchess, was on one of the attacked ships, and she was absolutely fuming at how useless the Venedict forces were. Meanwhile, Lucio, the Doge of Venedict, thought this was their shot to push the Empire away since their aggressive ways weren't exactly winning over the Queen of Centro. Lucio also figured Mahmut had something to do with all this drama. He suspected Mahmut orchestrated the pirate attack, knowing it'd make Venedict back out of their agreement with the Empire. Both Brega and Lucio couldn't help but be impressed by Mahmut's guts and smarts for pulling off such a bold move. Meanwhile, Mahmut was chilling in a little shop, buying fur coats to prep for the freezing cold up north. By November 7th, Mahmut and his crew headed to the northern region's only nation, Regatul Urado, which had been closed off to the world for 400 years. No trade, no nothing. After braving the brutal winter, they finally reached the gates, where they faced some serious security checks before being allowed in. Mahmut noticed how harshly the locals were treated and had to go through even tougher inspections before they could enter the inner part of the nation. Even then, Mahmut had to wait in a secluded spot while his meeting with the minister got cleared. After another round of intense checks, Mahmut and his squad finally met Margit, the Minister of Diplomatic Affairs to Turkey. Margit, a sharp and stylish lady, gave them a tour of the nation and introduced herself as the kulak, leader of the place. She casually mentioned that His Majesty was well aware of her position, so they didn't need to stress. Mahmut and his crew chatted with her about their earlier meeting with the Empire that year. As they strolled, they ended up at the Lance Cavalry training grounds, where soldiers were practicing and goofing around. Kiros asked Margit how her nation managed to make iron goods if they were so self-reliant. Margit explained they got by just fine, thanks to their massive iron ore supply. Out of nowhere, Mahmut spotted a northern goshawk flying overhead. Margit recognized it as her dad's pet eagle and ran to greet him as he rode up on horseback. But instead of a warm welcome, she got scolded for being too hasty and disrespectful. Turns out, her dad was none other than King Zygmunt of Urado. The king introduced himself to everyone and then threw down a challenge to Mahmut, an eagle-bearer contest. Mahmut took him up on it and managed to wow the king with Iskander's skills. After their showdown, Mahmut starts picturing a future where Turkey teams up with the country, and he's like, man, this could really mess up the empire's invasion plans. Zygmunt, on the other hand, respects the fight but bounces, letting Mahmut know he's not giving in to any of his requests because his country's all about surviving on their own. Mahmut stays quiet and keeps rolling with the princess on their nighttime tour. Margit shows them the fishermen coming back and gives them a moment to soak in the beauty of it all. But then, bam, they catch a whiff of that nasty fermented crap smell coming from the cliffs to the west. Margit points out that the stench is so bad it even keeps the Empire's people away. As they head out of the village, they spot a local dude wandering into the snowy wilderness. Luckily, they manage to bring him back to his family. Mahmut notices Margit looking super down and realizes something seriously off with this place. Later at dinner, Zygmunt spills the tea about why the guy tried to off himself. Turns out, there's a famine wrecking their land, and since they're broke as hell, some of the older folks just wander off to die so there's more food for everyone else. Hanum loses it and calls the king out for stuffing his face while his people starve. The king goes on some rant about how his grandpa and great-grandpa died the same way, and that he might go out like that too. Mahmut snaps and tells the king to trade with other countries to survive, but the king's too stubborn, saying he doesn't want to break 400 years of tradition and risk ending up like Phoenike. Meanwhile, in the background, there's this blonde girl eavesdropping on the whole dinner drama. Zygmunt keeps running his mouth until dinner's over and everyone heads to bed. Once everyone's gone, Zygmunt decides to team up with the Empire, and his blonde daughter, the one who was creeping earlier, pushes him to go for it. Meanwhile, Mahmut and the squad are struggling to sleep because the stench from those western cliffs is straight up deadly. Out of nowhere, Abariga recognizes the smell. It's sterco, bird poop from Centro's Sud Island. If they can check out the cliffs, they might find something interesting. They get the mister's green light and head over. When they get there, the smell of bird droppings mixed with sand hits them hard. Margit breaks down the history of the droppings, and Abariga explains that sterco is basically fossilized bird crap. He realizes it could be worth a ton of money and sends a sample to Zaganos for testing. Zaganos and Suleiman test the sterco by dunking it in some liquid and comparing it to a control sample. Turns out, the Snowy Nation's sterco is way better quality than what they're used to. They send word to Mahmut and his crew up north that they might have hit the jackpot, but before they can celebrate, Zygmunt's guards show up and drag them to the throne room for an emergency meeting. Mahmut and his crew roll up and meet Zygmunt, his two daughters, and some illegitimate dude from the Empire. They get down to business, and Zygmunt agrees to team up with the Empire. The Empire's envoy starts spouting a bunch of nonsense, promising Zygmunt the moon and stars if he plays along, but Mahmut, being bold, decides to jump in and share his 2 cents. He spills the tea about some high-quality sterco they found. Abariga backs him up, explaining that this sterco is super valuable and could make Urado crazy rich for years. Mahmut promises that if they strike a deal with Torki Pashalu, he'll personally make sure it all works out. The Empire, of course, tries to mess up Torki's plans, but Margit steps in and calls out her clueless dad. She warns him that the Empire's just gonna trap Urado in debt with no way out. Meanwhile, her sister Gertrude, who's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, sides with the Empire, saying it's smarter to back the stronger team, aka the Empire. The envoy keeps running his mouth with total garbage until Mahmut shuts him down and lays out the truth about what's really going on. Mahmut's explanation makes it crystal clear to Zygmunt which side he should pick. To seal the deal, Zygmunt drags the envoy to the execution grounds and officially locks in the alliance with Torki Pashalu. Meanwhile, Louis and the other bigwigs of the empire were chilling with the emperor, who wasn't exactly vibing with Louis's recent pushy tactics to snatch up more land. Louis laid out some solid receipts about how Centro couldn't hold its own and why they should take them on, but some of the other officials, like this short dude with wacky hair in a wheelchair, weren't buying it. The guy argued that the empire didn't need to waste its troops and resources on pointless wars. He figured they were doing just fine without picking fights. For once, the peace-loving folks were actually making some sense. The dude kept going back and forth with Louis, who clapped back, saying violence and aggression were the only tools that worked for solving problems. Corentin Pino, the general of the Balt-Rhine Land Army, jumped in too, making it clear he wasn't Team Louis either. Louis wasn't having it and called them out, saying they were just salty because they knew he was smarter than them. He brushed off their failure to take the snowy city, saying it wasn't a reason to give up. He kept talking a big game until it was time for the emperor to weigh in. In the end, the emperor, who's just as shady as Louis, asked him to pitch his next plan. Meanwhile, Mahmut and his crew were still in Urado, hashing out how messed up it was that Zygmunt had executed their envoy. Right then, the king rolled in and doubled down on his alliance with Torki. Mahmut, a bit on edge, asked if the empire would come for them over the envoy thing, but Zygmunt didn't seem to care one bit about their drama. With that sorted, Mahmut shifted gears to explain how the Sturko goods would be shipped to the right nations for sale. He checked in with Hanum to make sure she was ready to handle the massive supply chain. Hanum, being the natural-born merchant she was, told him not to sweat it. Mahmut then asked the king for the green light to head back to Torki the next day. Just as they were wrapping up, Margit showed up and introduced herself as Hanum's travel buddy. Hanum wasn't thrilled, but went along with it. The next day, the crew hit the road for their long trip back to Torki. On the way, Abariga gave Mahmut props for getting Venedik to turn against the empire and dragging other states along with them. What they didn't realize was that things were heating up in Venedik while they were on the move. After their clash with the empire, Venedik and some other nations made a secret pact to look the other way when pirates attacked the imperial fleet. But one nation, the Republic of Lisolani, decided to go rogue and help the imperial fleet instead. Turns out, Lisolani had its own sneaky plans. Catching wind of this, Lucio sent Brega to Lisolani to figure out what the shady Doria was up to. Brega set sail right away and called out Doria, who played dumb and denied everything. Doria claimed his country's actions were sometimes out of his control. Still, the sly guy promised to handle it, while letting Brega and his crew enjoy their stay in the city. After the meeting with the dog, Brega and his crew head downstairs, all confused about whether they should trust that dog or not. Right then, they stumble across a bunch of actors freaking out over some dude named Paolo, who's super sick and apparently brought some nasty plague to the city on a ship from the west. Brega and his partner take note of the drama and rush to report it to Lucio ASAP. Meanwhile, Doria sneaks off to meet with some Empire agents who are hyped about how he totally tricked Brega and his buddy into thinking he was being straight with them. Doria's got big plans. He's aiming to wipe out Venedik and have his family take over the Centro. The Empire guys are super impressed with his scheming and make sure he knows it. Brega, on the other hand, decides to play it safe and parks his ship somewhere far from the action until the plague dies down. When they finally get back to Venedik, Lucio figures it's better to chill for a bit and halt sea travel for now, just in case Doria wasn't lying about the plague. Either way, they're gearing up for whatever comes next, so they're not caught off guard. Meanwhile, Mahmut heads home to Torki and finds Lucio casually smoking a hookah on his couch. Mahmut's like, "What are you even doing here?" Turns out Lucio's sticking around to check out the next Divan meeting and see Torchi for himself. If this alliance works out, it means Berlik Torki, Regatul Urado, and the Republic of Venedik can finally team up and get help from other nations to push back against the Empire. Mahmut welcomes him to Torki and wishes him a good stay. The next day, the big shots from the three nations meet up for another divan. Orhan gets all googly-eyed over his girl Aish again and has a little moment with her. When the meeting kicks off, Lucio makes his pitch for an alliance with the other two nations. Bayuk Pasha's cool with it. He's got no reason to say no. But Zygmunt? Oh, he's got trust issues. The guy doesn't believe Lucio for a second and thinks he'll bail on the alliance the first chance he gets. Lucio claps back, reminding Zygmunt he's not exactly squeaky clean either, bringing up how he broke a centuries-old law in his own capital not too long ago. After Lucio's mic drop, Zygmunt calls on Mahmut, his boy, to back him up. Mahmut steps up and vouches for Lucio, telling everyone to chill and consider the fact that Lucio showed up in person for this meeting. As the meeting rolls on, Bayuk gets word from Zaganos that a massive fleet from the Empire and Lysolani has locked down Phoenike and Theros. If they don't break the blockade, the whole western Centro region is going to fall to the Empire. With this news, Aish cuts in to show the Pashas what happens when the two strongest nations crumble under the Empire's control. That's when it hits Lucio. He's been playing right into Louis's hands this whole time, taking the plague seriously and shutting down all shipping in Venedig. Yeah, that was a huge screw-up, and now he's got to deal with the fallout. Zygmunt, fired up by Lucio's words, finally agrees to sign the alliance. Once that's done, Zaganos and Halil Pasha jump straight into planning how to move their land army to the best spot for the fight. Halil Pasha figures the Republic of Fiore won't just let them waltz through since they see Torquians as a bunch of barbarians. If they're not careful, they could end up fighting Fiore instead. Bayazit suggests picking up allies as they cross the plains on their way to the battlefield, and everyone's on board with the idea. Meanwhile, Lucio plans to head back to Venedig to rally the smaller Centro nations, thinking they might be tempted to side with the Empire. Once he's got them all on the same page, they'll set sail for the west. In the next scene, Lucio suits up in some super tight armor, while Bayazit gets a personal caravan ready for him. Zaganos and Suleiman have one last chat about keeping things calm in Fiore and other nations before the main Torquay forces show up. Mahmut and his crew tag along with Suleiman to the southern nations to negotiate opening their gates ahead of the main army's arrival. Meanwhile, Bayuk and Zygmunt talk about splitting up their forces to support the war effort. Bayuk asks Zaganos to lead the state's main army, but Zaganos turns it down, saying his skills are better used elsewhere. Halil steps up and takes the job with confidence, reminding everyone that he's got the experience and won't make dumb rookie mistakes like those know-it-all youngsters. Louis, on the other hand, keeps scheming to create his perfect world. Near the Dux Regionis Ovest, the moon turns blood red, signaling the arrival of the Imperial fleet. In just one night, the entire fortress of Ovest Dux Regionis falls to the Empire, marking the start of the Great Rumeriana War. After taking over Ovest, Pino rolled up to Dux Regionis Scoglio and hit up the boss there, Dux Regulus, with an ultimatum to surrender. Once Regulus got a good look at how massive the Imperial army was, he didn't have much of a choice and gave in to their power. Meanwhile, Mahmut and his crew were making their way to the Cuore di Rumeriana, a region made up of 34 city-states, each one smaller but cockier than the last. Their first stop was the Republic of Arno, a place so tiny it even caught Mahmut off guard. At the city gates, they found a crowd of people whining and protesting. Out of nowhere, this skinny dude dashed to the palace gates, grabbed a few bags of gold, and headed back to his crew. On his way, he spotted Mahmut, pegged him as a Torquian, and noticed his crew was a mix of different nationalities. He gave them a quick thanks for passing through, and went about his business. Suleiman then broke it down for Mahmut, explaining that those guys were mercenaries from Taro, a city known for its shady El Toro citizens. These guys were in Arno to hustle for cash, doing mercenary work, and yeah, they weren't exactly known for being stand-up folks. Since none of the cities in the region had decent armies, it wasn't surprising they had to rely on these types. Inside the palace, Gonfaloniere Giulio was losing his cool over the half-baked job the El Toro mercenaries had done, even after he'd shelled out a ton of cash. He finally chilled out when Suleiman and his crew showed up to chat. Once they got his attention, Mahmut laid out the situation with the blockade between Phoenike and Theros, trying to get Giulio to see the bigger picture. Turns out, Giulio was already clued in about the blockade and even the Urado-Torquay alliance. Mahmut made his case and asked Giulio to let the Torquian army pass through his city, but Giulio wasn't having it. He got all fired up and said it wasn't his call to make. If they wanted that to happen, they'd need permission from Fiore, the big boss city of the Cuore di Rumeriana. If they didn't follow Fiore's rules, they'd be kicked out of the region. Stepping away from the sweaty Giulio, Mahmut and his crew took a breather and vented about how much hate they were getting as Torquians in this region. Suleiman pointed out that these smug folks had gotten way too comfy with their peace and couldn't see the Empire's sneaky moves coming. Determined to get their message across, Mahmut and his crew hit the road to Fiore ASAP. Meanwhile, in a pub in Fiore, Giacomo and his two clueless buddies were knocking back drinks and griping about the looming war. The Empire had not only blockaded the Central War, but was also making life tough for the other cities. Fiore was stuck in the middle of it all, like it or not, and didn't have the manpower to fight back. The next morning, Mahmut and his crew rolled into Fiore, dressed to impress, and headed to meet the Gonfaloniere. On the way, Suleiman reminded them to keep it short and sweet since the Gonfaloniere wasn't exactly known for his patience. Mahmut carefully planned out what he was going to say and led the group into the castle. Once inside, Mahmut was blown away by the stunning art gallery in the place. Suleiman gave him a heads up to not let the jerks in the castle get under his skin, as they'd probably try to push his buttons. When they finally roll up to the Gonfaloniere's room, they find Katerina herself just hanging out, cool as a cucumber, waiting for them. She gives a friendly hey to her old fling, Suleiman, then shifts her attention to Mahmut, who's totally caught off guard but manages to greet her politely, along with the rest of the crew. Katerina seems to vibe with Mahmut and puts him at ease. Not long after, they kick off their meeting. Katerina starts off by killing some time, casually mentioning how she's already clued in on the Empire's blockade. Meanwhile, Mahmut keeps losing focus because Katerina is over there making tea like it's no big deal. Then she drops some news. There's an emergency assembly of the Cuore di Rumeriana happening the next day, but instead of keeping things professional, Katerina pulls a weird move that totally throws Mahmut off. He catches her playing footsie with Suleiman under the table while he's trying to grab his hat. When it's finally Mahmut's turn to speak, time's already up. The 30-minute timer goes off. Afterward, Mahmut and his crew hit up a nearby pub to vent about how Katerina completely messed with his head and the whole meeting. Abiriga, being the only one thinking straight, points out that Katerina never actually planned to negotiate with them. So why did she even bother meeting with them instead of just waiting for the assembly? They toss around a few theories, but none of them really make sense. Meanwhile, Giacomo and his crew hear about Katerina's meeting with the Torquians. Giacomo keeps his mouth shut while the other old dudes trash talk Katerina for supposedly teaming up with Torquay. After mulling it over, Giacomo finally snaps and drops an F-bomb, telling everyone they should side with the Empire instead. A few dozen miles away, in Scoglio, part of the Dux region, a kulak, basically a city bigwig, is on the run from a Rod-Orm guard who caught him sneaking around earlier. The kulak leads the guard to a quiet spot, takes him out, and gets ready to send a message to Suleiman ASAP. But before he can do that, he overhears General Pino giving a speech, claiming the Empire has already staked their claim on Phoenician land. Realizing this is seriously bad news, the kulak books it to send messages to Fiore, Cielo, Arno, Altu, and another eastern nation. Just as he finishes sending the messages, Eleanor shows up and takes him out. Back in Fiore, Suleiman Bey is trying to figure out what Katerina's game is, but no one's willing to spill the tea on her. That night, Giacomo and his crew show up with a petition full of signatures from regular folks, basically banning Katerina from ever siding with Torquay. They press her about whose side she's really on, and remind her how awful Torquay has been to them in the past. They warn her not to forget history, and to tread carefully from here on out. After hearing them out, Katerina assures them she's not Team Torquay, at least not yet. She thanks them for dropping by and sends them on their way. Once they're gone, she hangs up a portrait of Suleiman on her wall like a lovesick teenager and quietly apologizes for betraying his trust. The next day, a guard delivers the kulak's message from Scoglio to Suleiman. After seeing everything the Empire has done to Foinike and Scoglio, Suleiman decides it's time to stop playing nice with the peace-loving folks of Fiore. In the next scene, Suleiman storms into the assembly hall, shutting down their meeting to drop the latest news from Scoglio. Katerina and her crew reveal that they're planning to create a neutral third power in Rumeriana to stay out of the Torquay-Balt-Rhine war. Mahmut is left completely stunned. After hearing the crap Katerina just pulled, Suleiman and Mahmut are completely floored. Katerina brushes off their stunned reactions and keeps rambling about the signatures she supposedly got from all these people, claiming they won't let her allow the Torquian army to pass through Fiore. She's talking so much nonsense that Suleiman grabs the agreement letter off her desk and burns it to ashes. Then, he hits her with another bombshell, telling her to check out a blood-stained letter that a Torquian messenger risked his life to deliver. As he shows her the letter, Abiriga and Kiros lock the door to buy some time before the guards bust in and arrest them. Suleiman explains what went down between the Empire and Scoglio 3 days ago, while Mahmut points out how Foinike's ignorance led to their downfall. He tells them there's still a chance to fix things, but some of the older politicians start grilling Mahmut to make sure the letter is legit. Mahmut vouches for Suleiman, saying he's not the type to lie, especially not to the Gonfaloniere. When the guards finally arrive, Katerina has Suleiman and his crew thrown in jail and postpones the meeting to explore other options for Fiore and the Cuore di Rumeriana to weather the storm. While locked up, Giacomo and his crew won't stop griping about Katerina even considering doing what Torquay wants, but soon enough, confirmation rolls in, and they realize Suleiman's been telling the truth all along. Katerina calls Mahmut and his squad back to her quarters, and officially throws her support behind the Torquayan tripartite alliance. Mahmut thanks her for understanding, and Katerina wishes them luck as she keeps researching ways to protect her region. Mahmut thanks her again, and promises to send word to Halil and the Torquayan forces to start moving through the Cuore di Rumeriana. Campana. With their business with Caterina wrapped up, the crew sets their sights on South Rumariana, specifically Taro, to keep the negotiations rolling. But Suleiman decides to stick around for a bit to take care of something before meeting back up with them. Meanwhile, Giacomo and his crew are fuming over Caterina's decision and decide to take matters into their own hands. Since Caterina's quarters are always surrounded by guards, they plan to sneak in using the Rossi family's secret passageway. Dressed like total criminals, they make their way to her quarters and confront her about letting Torquay march through their states. They demand she rethink her decision, but Caterina stands her ground, saying staying neutral would mean losing everything. As the gonfaloniere of Fiore, she refuses to backtrack on her promise. At this point, the old guys have had enough of her stubbornness. They shove Giacomo aside and hold Caterina at knife point. Just as they're about to stab her, Suleiman swoops in through the vents like a total hero and saves her. After handling the situation, Suleiman lays it all out for Giacomo, assuring him that Fiore is in good hands. With that settled, Suleiman spends the rest of the night with Caterina. The next day, Kiros and Mahmoud are chatting about the sketchy group of mercenaries they ran into and how they're connected to the next city they're headed to. Speak of the devil, they stumble across a random hot spring and find some orange-haired knucklehead chilling in the water. The guy starts trash-talking Mahmoud until he figures out Mahmoud's a pasha. Turns out the dude's name is Urbak or something, and he promises to lead them to the twin mayors of Taro eventually. Mahmoud and his crew decide to tag along. Meanwhile, Blanca, the kulak of Campana, is secretly keeping tabs on the Empire's army as they march through a ravine. At the same time, Halil Pasha gets good news from Mahmoud and wastes no time getting his men ready to march toward the city of Fiore so they can push on to Pino. Mahmoud and his squad make it to Taro safely and meet the twin mayors, who turn out to be a real piece of work. The twins don't think much of Mahmoud as a leader, so they throw a little challenge his way to test him. The deal? Mahmoud has to command 400 mercenaries and take a castle gate they're defending. If he can snag the feather off the first mayor's hat, he wins. Soon after, Mahmoud gets his 400 mercenaries, and the game begins. Back in Venedig, Lucio Doge is gearing his nation up for war. He orders round-the-clock shifts at the shipyards and calls Brega's fleet back to Venedig. Zaganos gets word about the Empire's movements and realizes there's no turning back now. Over in Taro, Mahmoud and his team smash the mayor's test, earning their respect. Aish breaks down their military strategy for Kemal, warning him that the Empire is no joke and they need to stay sharp. Meanwhile, Bayazid is prepping for war in his own country, and Ismail, the Sultan of Buchak, arms his troops to make sure they're ready to bring it in battle. That afternoon, Mahmoud and his crew officially pass the test, winning over the Taro twins. Wang weighs in on the looming fight, while Hanum and Margit vent about the constant war and chaos tied to the Empire. Hanum reassures her that Mahmoud's here to make things better, so there's no need to stress over the war. After winning the challenge, Mahmoud gets the green light from the Toro twins to let Torquay's army pass through. That night, Pino and his gang torch Campana to the ground. As the city burns, a young engineer named Vasco watches everything he loves go up in flames. The guy grabs some secret plans for a machine, hides inside the city's big bell, and rolls himself downhill, crashing into a bunch of Empire soldiers. Vasco blacks out for a bit and almost gets killed by some guards, but Blanca shows up just in time to take out the guards and save him. She takes Vasco to the Allied camp while his city continues to burn. Meanwhile, Mahmoud is kicking back with the Toro mercenaries, eating, drinking, and chatting with the twins. He figures out that these guys are all about the money, so he doesn't waste time. Using Torquay's cash, he buys 7,500 mercenaries by putting down a deposit and promising the rest later. The twins take the deal and start getting things ready. Out of nowhere, the hot spring jerk, Urbak or whatever his name is, shows up and decides to join Mahmoud's team. Apparently, he's curious to see where Mahmoud's journey will take him. A few thousand miles away, Louis is brooding over a chess piece he thinks represents Torquay's last shot at winning. If his plans work out, he won't have to worry about that threat. Mahmoud and his crew soon lock down Espada's support and head straight for Cielo. Just then, a kulak reports that the Empire recently took over Campana. Hearing this, Mahmoud realizes they're running out of time. He's determined to reach Cielo and secure their alliance before the Empire gets to them. On their way to a safe haven, Blanca and Vasco run into a whole bunch of refugees wandering through the mountain trails, all trying to find a place to call home. After chatting with a few unlucky folks, Blanca figures out they're deserters from Centaur and other small towns that gave up to the Empire's army. She asks them where they're headed, and they tell her they're aiming for Cielo. Meanwhile, Mahmoud and his crew are climbing these crazy steep mountain paths to reach Cielo and meet with the Fiore director. On the way, Abariga gives them a quick rundown of Cielo's backstory. It's basically a refugee nation that kept growing by taking in prisoners of war and stragglers. To keep things running smoothly, the leaders of their groups got made into directors. Over time, the place has stayed pretty pretty chill by keeping things low-key and not causing any trouble. Later, Mamut and his crew end up at a theater where the big boss of Cielo, the director, is acting in a play about heaven and earth in Chieloyan culture. Urbach tries to explain the whole idea to Mamut, who's not impressed and didn't even realize the main actor is the director himself. Urbach also breaks down the concept of Chielo's key to Mamut. They hang around until the play's over, and once Carbajal, the director, finishes up, he talks about giving the bad guys a shot at redemption if they're forgiven. Some people in the audience aren't cool with this and start questioning why Carbajal changed the script, but Carbajal doesn't care and keeps talking about good and evil. Right then, his assistant shows up and reminds him he's got a meeting with his guests. Carbajal wraps things up, steps off the stage, and heads to his office. Before he leaves, Mamut stops him and asks if he's really the one in charge of Cielo. Carbajal realizes Mamut's his guest and invites him to hang out in his quarters. As they hike up the mountain to the office, Carbajal and his assistant explain how Cielo gets its funding. Turns out, it's all thanks to rich donors who have more money than they know what to do with. They also brag about Cielo's lush green fields and thriving ports, perfect for farming and fishing. The people of Cielo have been living the good life, supported by these donors, for over 1,000 years. After chatting and trekking for a bit, they finally reach the assembly hall. Outside, there's a massive crowd of refugees, like 30,000 people, begging for asylum to heal their sick and find shelter. Carbajal tells his partner Cassandra to open the gates and let them in so they can start helping them right away. Urbach and Kiros try to warn them about pissing off the Empire, but Carbajal doesn't care. He's all about helping people, and leaving them to die of hunger and thirst goes against what Cielo stands for. Whether or not the Empire gets mad, Carbajal couldn't care less. If anyone tries to mess with them, they'll face his wrath. Mamut takes this chance to ask Carbajal to join their anti-Empire alliance and help end the war. Carbajal listens to everything Mamut says and agrees to step up and do what needs to be done. 13 days later, Pino and his go-to partner in crime are hashing out their next move against Halil Pasha and his crew. She fills him in. Halil's chilling in Toro, taking it easy. If they want to win this thing, they've got to move fast and catch him off guard. Meanwhile, Halil Pasha is living it up, getting pampered with massages from the ladies connected to the twin mayors. Once he's done relaxing, they start talking shop about his campaign through the Corre di Rumeriana. The mayors promise to make his journey through their turf worth his while. Halil thanks them for their support and breaks down the Torquian army's plans for them. Right then, Blanca and Vasco roll in from Campana to meet with Halil Pasha. Halil gives them a moment to speak. Vasco, a foundry worker from Campana, introduces himself, and Halil gives him a warm welcome to Torquay. Vasco asks for a big favor and shows off the blueprints for a massive charquier he's been designing for ages, hoping Halil will back him up to build it and use it against the Empire's forces. But Halil shuts him down, saying it's just not realistic to build something like that right now. Vasco tries to change his mind, but Halil's not budging. To keep the plans from falling into enemy hands, Halil burns them and tells Vasco to drop the idea. Just then, a Torquian soldier bursts in with news. The Imperial forces are on the move toward Cielo. Halil quickly excuses himself to handle the situation. He jumps on his horse and leads his army toward Cielo, hoping to beat the Empire there. Vasco, not ready to give up, pulls out a backup copy of his blueprints and starts working on the project anyway. Over in Cielo, Carbajal and Cassandra are piecing together the Empire's next move. Mamut and his crew also catch wind of the Empire's plans and realize the enemy's strategy is solid. They immediately start evacuating the city, getting ready for the fight heading their way. The group starts to lose hope, but Carbajal reassures them. He tells them about Cielo's cage, a trap designed to take out any foolish enemies who wander into it. For now, they've got nothing to stress about. The next day, the Torquian army rolls into Cielo, and Mamut rushes out to greet Halil Pasha. After all the formalities, Halil decides to set up camp just outside the city. A few dozen miles away, two Imperial battalion commanders, Frentzen and Adam, are kicking back, enjoying some of Cielo's famous spring apples. Out of nowhere, the bridge connecting two mountains collapses. Frentzen and Adam immediately know Cielo's behind it and decide to head back to Fondo to stock up on supplies. The next day, Carbajal and Mahmut count up the Imperial forces and figure there are about 67,000 troops. Not long after, the Imperial army rolls in and starts chatting about the nice wooden houses in Cielo and how they were built. Adam reminds Pilo that Cielo hasn't surrendered yet, and since their supply lines are cut, the Imperials are the ones stuck in a bad spot. Adam's right-hand woman brings up their 12th army, led by Christald Bals, and says they're counting on them to deliver food and supplies. Bals promises to get the goods to them soon. Meanwhile, Mamut and Carbajal prep for the siege. Later that night, Bals and his crew spot the Cielo militia waiting to jack their supplies. They quickly form up for battle and try to fend off Cielo's forces, but since Mamut is leading the attack, there's not much they can do to stop it. After taking out the fighters, Mahmut and his team torch the Empire's supplies and dip. Pino and his squad see the fire but stay calm. Meanwhile, Bals and his army notice the Haubia gate opening and rush in, hoping to break into the city and hit Cielo from the inside. After seeing the 12th Division head through Haubia, Pino and his crew head for the gates too. The Torquian army sees everyone heading in and waves them off like, good luck with that. Once 2 army corps are through the gates, the Empire's forces suddenly stop because Frenzel senses something's off. He figures there's a trap waiting for them in the city and realizes it'd be dumb to just walk right into it. When Bal sees the 1st Division hesitating, he gets a little nervous too, but his commander, Four Eyes, pushes him to keep moving deeper into the city, so he does. When they're far enough in, Cielo's defenders dump oil all over the wooden parts of the city and light it up. Unfortunately for the Empire, about 10,000 men get caught in the blaze, but most of the heavy hitters are still outside, ready to fight. After seeing Cielo's big move, Pino puts 20,000 troops at the back and rallies the rest to form a blockade. Back at the Empire, Louis is schooling his assistant Niccolo on how iron gets forged into all kinds of useful stuff while they're watching a fight between Glalat and some random dude in the arena. Once Niccolo gives a decent answer, Louis dives deeper into the lesson, just as Glalat finally wins the match. As Glalat grabs his prize money, Louis breaks down the importance of the Rod Orm people, making sure Niccolo gets how crucial those guys are for keeping the Empire's weapons top-notch. Meanwhile, after seeing Cielo's secret weapon, Frenzel tells Pino and the crew to chill and stay sharp for whatever the director might pull next. Carbajal, on the other hand, is hanging back, waiting for the general and his squad to roll through the gates. After waiting a while, he shuts the gates and moves on to prep for the next attack. The next day, Carbajal apologizes to Mahmut for not taking out more Imperial soldiers in the last fight. Mahmut tells him it's all good and assures him his efforts won't be forgotten. Back at their camp, Pino and his sub-generals decide to switch up their strategy. Pino orders 22,000 soldiers who sat out the first siege to roll with him to Torquay's camp, planning to crush whoever's there and snag their supplies. After calling in the chosen generals, Pino leaves Frenzel in charge of the camp while he's gone. Later, Frenzel and Adam start wondering why the military engineers are even involved in this fight. They figure it's part of the lady strategist's plan to take down Torquay faster. Frenzel shoots her a glare, clearly not a fan. By midday, Carbajal, Mahmut, and the others notice part of the Imperial army heading toward Torquay's camp. They talk about the odds, and from the number of soldiers Mahmut counts, it's clear Torquay's got the upper hand. When Halil Pasha hears about the Empire's forces, he wastes no time packing up and getting the hell out of there. 8 days later, Pino and his troops reach Torquay's last campsite, only to find scraps of what was left behind. It doesn't take long for them to figure out Halil Pasha is trying to dodge a fight by keeping a 2-day gap between them. 3 days after that, Halil Pasha gets word about a river they can cross on their way out of the Empire's reach. He starts planning to cross it, thinking it's a solid move. What he doesn't know is that the Imperial soldiers are sharp as hell. They whip up some rafts out of logs and close the 2-day gap in just a few hours by floating down the river. Meanwhile, Halil and his crew are cruising along, only to run smack into their worst nightmare, the Empire. The Imperial soldiers are already set up, weapons ready, itching for a fight. Adam can't help but admire the lady strategist, even though she looks like a total bimbo. As for Halil Pasha, he knows there's no way out now, so he gears up for battle. He uses an old, predictable formation and sends about 8,000 men to lead the charge and complete the setup. Once the battle horn blows, Halil's horse archers rush at Pino's forces, firing arrows at the Imperial soldiers. But the Empire's got solid shields, so they block the attack without breaking a sweat. Halil keeps pushing, letting his horse archers get wiped out by Pino's second lance-based strategy. Once Halil figures out the front line is no joke, he pulls back the lancers and sends in the horse archers for round 2. Pino's like, been there, done that, and sets up the same shield formation again. His guys block the arrows, and Pino realizes this is the same trick Halil pulled 14 years ago when they first faced off. This time though, Pino thinks he's solid since the cliffs are sealing off the rear of the Imperial army. But plot twist, 8,000 of Halil's soldiers climb the rocks behind them and sneak up on the Imperial troops. Halil and his crew rush in, ready to trap the Imperial army. Just when they're feeling all victorious, Pino opens up his formation, lures Halil's division inside, and flips the script to surround them instead. Halil's backup squad of 8,000 charges in, thinking they'll finish the job, but nope, Imperial engineers have planted massive cannons waiting for them. As soon as they get close, boom, the cannons go off, wrecking the rear attackers. Within minutes, Halil's forces are completely surrounded, and he's in deep trouble. The Imperial commanders give props to the engineers for their smart moves as they fire another round of cannonballs, smashing into Halil's 2nd Division and throwing them into chaos. Adam, one of the Imperial soldiers, watches his commander, waiting for the next play. Meanwhile, Halil is scrambling, trying to break out of the trap by sending his troops to the front lines, but it's already game over. Adam and another dude with a mustache compliment Lady Kokoschka for coming up with such a killer strategy. Lady Coco thanks them, but gives all the credit to Louis for masterminding the plan. While the chaos continues, Louis is tweaking his strategy on the fly and explains what inspired the soul-crushing cannon's creation. During the battle, Abbas, Halil's right-hand man, gets killed. Halil, desperate, charges straight at Pino, but he doesn't even get close. Enemy lancers stab him over and over until Pino finishes the job by chopping off Halil's head with his sword. A few days later, Mahmut and the others see Halil Pasha's head mounted on a stake as the Imperial army marches back to Cielo with Torquian prisoners of war in tow. The news of the Empire's betrayal reaches Torki Pashalu fast, and a divan meeting is called to figure out their next move. After hearing about the Empire's brutal actions, some folks are all about revenge, but Zaganos tells them to chill and use their brains instead of their emotions. He breaks it down, explaining why Halil lost. While the Empire was beefing up its military, Halil was off playing peacekeeper. He got lazy, and it cost him. Zaganos even uses himself as an example, saying he'll be the one to take down Baltrine personally. Suleiman takes a moment to grieve Halil Pasha, who was a big influence in his life. After reading Halil's final message, he shares some inspirational words to honor him. Mahmut, on the other hand, reflects on the memories he shared with Halil Pasha. Once he's done reminiscing, he pulls himself together, wipes away his tears, and admits he's been pretty useless so far for being such a coward. Then, Halil's ghost shows up, anime style, and gives him some motivational advice. In their own ways, Zaganos, Suleiman, and Mahmut pay their respects to Halil Pasha. When Mahmut's done crying, he stands tall, swears to make the Empire pay, and vows to unleash hell on Earth. After grabbing the Torquian army's supplies, the Empire decides to play the long game with a war of attrition against the stuck Cielo forces, leaving both sides in a deadlock. Worried their supplies might run out, Mahmut asks Venedict for backup. Doge Lucio wastes no time and sets sail with his fleet, aiming to bust through the blockade between Phoenique and Theros, which was being held down by the Republic of Lisolani's Boccanegra armada at the Empire's request. After days of intense fighting, Venedict's armada finally breaks through, taking out the captain running the blockade. Once the captain's dealt with, Lucio has a chat with Doria to smooth things over and avoid any drama. They end up shaking hands and agreeing to dominate the Empire at sea while keeping things chill until a new Centro ruler is chosen. Lucio, grinning, makes it clear to Doria that he's not getting a shot at the throne. By May 18th, the Empire loses its grip on the Centro, thanks to Venedict making sure of it. But as they sail through wild seas, a month-long storm slows down the Venedict armada, keeping them from reaching Cielo in time. This delay hits hard, tipping the war in the Empire's favor as Cielo struggles to hang on. When the storm finally clears, Kiros lets out a breath of relief, hoping for good news from Mahmut Pasha. Turns out, Mahmut had used the storm as cover to meet up with some key players. But now that the storm's over, Carbajal has a new mess on his hands with his people. The endless rain trashed their food supplies, and the refugees they took in earlier are getting sicker by the day. With Venedict's fleet running late, the people start suspecting they've been betrayed, just like Phoenique was. Carbajal sits quietly in a meeting as everyone else vents their frustrations. When he finally speaks up, he tells them to chill out and trust Mahmut Pasha, who's out there rallying the remaining Torquians. That's when one of the hotheads pulls a knife, points it at Carbajal's throat, and apologizes for what he's about to do. Meanwhile, Mahmut and his crew finally link up with about 15,000 surviving soldiers. He thanks the person who saved so many of them and takes a moment to honor Halil Pasha's memory. Once he's gathered his thoughts, he orders his people to gear up and head back to Cielo. Back in Cielo, Kiros rushes to Abariga and Elbark to share what just went down with the director. At the same time, Abariga and another guy get a signal from Iskander, confirming that Mahmut successfully regrouped with the survivors. When Kiros arrives, he spills everything, including the people's plan to hand over the director to the Empire and surrender. Yeah, that's some seriously bad news. The Imperial soldiers are just kicking back, taking it easy, and gearing up for the next round against Cielo. Adam and Frenzel are griping about how Cielo's supplies are running low. While they're busy complaining, Frenzel hears some loud thuds, like an enemy squad is charging their camp. He steps outside, and sure enough, sees the Torquian cavalry, led by Mahmut, barreling toward them. Pino and Lady Coco spot the incoming army and immediately get ready to throw down. Mahmut's cavalry starts raining arrows on the Imperial soldiers, and then he sends Iskander to mess with the Imperial army's battle bulls. Iskander nails it, throwing the Empire's 8 divisions into chaos. While the Empire scrambles to fix their formation, Mahmut sneaks one of his guys into their sheep pen. The dude opens the gates and gets the sheep moving toward the Torquian army. Once outside, another Torquian guy takes over, leading the sheep back to Mahmut's crew. With their sheep secured, Mahmut and his army bounce, leaving the Empire without any food to keep them going. During their debrief, the Imperial generals are ticked off about the blonde commander's sneaky move to jack their food. When they ask for a description, they're told he's a golden eagle bearer. Meanwhile, Mahmut's squad is hyped, giving him props for cutting off the Empire's supplies. That night, 2 fools race to the Habia gate to hand over a surrender letter to Pino and raise the white flag. They also plan to hand Carbajal over to him. Luckily, Urbak and some random guy handle those clowns before they can screw everything up. As for the flag bearers, Abariga and Kiros take them out quietly and keep an eye on the Imperial soldiers. From their lookout point, they see the Imperials marching off to fight another battle. They refuse to let those idiots surrender and focus on finding Carbajal, while Mahmut deals with the Imperial troops. Frenzel and Adam chat about Coco's situation, hoping her smarts can finally give the Empire a win. The next day, 2 random generals talk about how the Torquians are laying low in Espada territory, taking time to recover. They start to realize how connected the eastern side of Rumeriana is, with supplies constantly flowing to Espada to keep the Torquians alive. One of them asks Coco, the master strategist, how the Torquians are pulling this off. She responds with something Louis once told her. Apparently, Louis had warned her about a ray of hope that could mess up his plans to take over the Torquian states. Coco tells Pino and the others that this ray of hope might be the blonde eagle bearer, who also happens to be Halil Pasha's foster son. 4 days later, Mahmut sends messenger pigeons to deliver his final message to Torki Pashalu. By nightfall, he and his soldiers are trekking through grassy plains, heading for a basin under the full moon. They're in good spirits as the moon lights their way. 2 days later, Coco figures out where the Torquian army will camp, near the Espadan border in a basin. She updates her army and starts debating the best move. After listening to enough nonsense from clueless generals, Coco finally steps in and urges them to catch up to the Torquian forces and settle the score. After 2 more days of travel, Mahmut and his crew finally reach the basin. They can feel the tension as the Imperial forces show up to face them. Both sides finally come face to face. Once all the Imperial soldiers unload from their rafts, Mahmut signals the rear Espadan army of 3,000 to rise from the grass and ambush the Imperials. Soon, reinforcements from Humo, Tauro, and other smaller cities show up, surrounding the Imperial army. Coco realizes too late how dumb it was to think she could trap Mahmut's forces. In the end, Mahmut proves he's got what it takes to stand his ground against the Empire. The Empire's in a major jam, and there's not much they can do to dig themselves out. Their only shot in this kumbaya mess is to fight their way out of Mahmut's trap. Step 1 of Mahmut's plan, he tells his archers to get their flaming arrows ready. Once everything's set, they light up the rafts, trapping the Imperial soldiers even more. But Pino, this guy's not throwing in the towel yet. He orders the 7th and 8th divisions to go head-to-head with the Espadan and Humoyan armies. Then he gives the green light for 2 more divisions to back them up. After that, he tells the last 4 divisions to roll with him to take out the Torquian army for good. As the Imperial troops start moving into their new formations, the Espadans, El Toro, and their crew charge in, messing up their plans big time. The 14th division scrambles to get their ballistic weapons ready, hoping to stall until reinforcements show up. But before they can even get their cannons going, the El Toro mercenaries toss a giant ladder into their ranks, scattering the soldiers. They're closing in on the cannons, ready to fire, when out of nowhere, the twin mayors swoop in and wreck the cannons. With the heavy weapons out of the picture, Mahmut's free to go on the offensive. The mercenaries signal the other Torquian divisions that they've nailed it, and everyone charges the Imperial soldiers at once. Pino and Coco see what's happening. Torquians trying to break out of the trap, and they're not having it. They call for backup ASAP. While waiting, the 7th and 8th divisions fall for a sneaky trick by the Espadans. They chase after the smaller Espadan soldiers, only to get lured further away from Pino's main army and straight into Mahmut's trap. The Imperial soldiers are so clueless, they don't even notice the dry moat the Espadans already dug out. By the time they start falling in, it's game over. With half their troops wiped out, the Espadans swarm the rest. In minutes, Pino gets the bad news. His 7th and 8th divisions are toast. Meanwhile, the mercenaries torch everything tied to the 13th Division, leaving nothing behind. Around then, Mahmut spots a way out of the encirclement and bolts for it. The 11th Division tries to break out to back up the fallen ranks, but Coco can already see the disaster coming. The mercenaries crush the 11th Division in no time. Now the encirclement's busted, and 3 or 4 divisions are already down. Reinforcements? Yeah, they show up way too late. Mahmut seizes the moment, pushing hard to wipe out the 7th and 8th Divisions completely. Coco catches on to their plan but realizes both sides are stuck in a deadlock. What she doesn't know is that Mahmut's got more tricks up his sleeve. When the time's right, Mahmut sneaks up from behind, leaps into the air, and wrecks one of the divisions. With the 7th and 8th Divisions totally destroyed, the defeated commander is left high and dry by his own people. It doesn't take long for the enemy to track him down and take him out while he's still holding the imperial flag. Back in the Empire, Louis the Bastard senses something's off, a bad vibe, and starts worrying about what's going down on the battlefield. Reyes, the chatty captain, finally gets how bad things are. He says some dumb stuff and charges at another big shot Torquine. Bad move. Reyes gets taken out by the Torquian soldiers. Meanwhile, Coco and Pino get word that Captain Barnett has managed to escape. Coco's cool with it since the military engineers need to be kept safe. She then tells Pino to round up what's left of the Imperial army, head to Espada, the closest city, and take it over while their defenses are still weak. If they pull this off, bouncing back is going to be a breeze. There's some back and forth about the plan, but Coco wins the argument, and Pino rallies his remaining troops to march toward Espada. Not long after, the 5th Division commander hears about Pino's decision to retreat. To help Pino get away, the commander keeps his division in front of the Torquians, trying to hold them off. But in no time, Mahmut shows up and steamrolls through the 5th Division like it's nothing. Meanwhile, Quiros and the crew take a breather to piece together their findings and figure out where the director's been stashed. They spot Mahmut's victory signal and give him props for crushing it. After that, Mahmut keeps chasing the retreating forces while Quiros and the team keep searching for the director. Coco and Pino see the Torquian victory signal and are absolutely fuming. While the other commanders complain about how annoying the Torquian strategy is, Coco stays quiet. When Pino asks why, she admits she messed up. Pino can't help but notice the irony. He thought this loss would crush the Torquians' morale, but instead, it boosted their confidence. At the crack of dawn, the Torquians start firing arrows at the Imperial Army's rear divisions. The division commander's focused, but it dawns on him too late that he's been played. When Mahmut and his forces come charging out of the fog, it's game over for the commander as his division gets trampled. Pino and what's left of his army keep rushing toward Espada, but they can see the dust cloud of the Torquians getting closer. One of them realizes Coco's plan is already toast, but he keeps his cool and hopes there aren't any traps ahead. Along the way, a wounded Imperial soldier starts ranting about how the Empire's brutal ways are somehow righteous. Clearly, the pain's messing with his head, and he slowly fades away. His buddy lays him down to rest for a second, but as soon as he hits the ground, scavengers hiding in the trees jump out with weapons. Pino tells his people to ignore them and focus on reaching Espada alive. Once they get there, they waste no time setting up ladders to start a siege. Pino positions soldiers at the rear to hold off any counterattacks. Just as they're getting ready, Lindsay, the leader of Espada's hired mercenaries, shows up on the city wall and warns Pino not to get cocky. Before long, Mahmut and his army arrive. Mahmut offers them a chance to surrender and avoid more bloodshed. At this point, Coco's a mess, emotional and desperate. She stands on her horse and estimates the Torquian forces at around 13,000. Since they've still got 15,000 soldiers, she's convinced they can win if they fight. Pino shuts her down and orders his men to raise their flags, signaling their intent to take over the city and hold off the Torquians. With that, Mahmut clenches his fist, ready to wrap up the final chapter of the Great Rumeriana War. Meanwhile, Blanca and Vasco get the lowdown on the war from a village lady. When Blanca hears what's going down in Cielo, she rushes to Vasco to spill the tea that the war's about to wrap up soon. Vasco's stoked to hear it, wishing the guy ending the war good luck and hoping he makes it out alive to tell the story. At the same time, Pino keeps pushing forward in his mission to take over Espada. He sends some troops to hold off Torquay while he charges in to claim the city. Mahmut bides his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When it hits, he goes full throttle at the Imperial soldiers blocking his way to Pino. Pino, thinking there's only a small group of mercenaries guarding Espada, rallies his men to go all out. But right as they're about to make their move, Lindsay crushes his spirits by revealing there are actually 10,000 mercenaries ready to protect Espada. She throws in some snark about their client being filthy rich, and then rains down arrows on the Imperial troops. Back in Cielo, Cassandra, Quiros, Abariga, and Urbak are freaking out while searching everywhere for Carbajal. The only place left to check is the Tower of Silence, which is a massive long shot. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the Imperial army is getting wrecked. losing half their 11th division with the numbers dropping by the minute. One commander begs Pino to surrender to save the rest of their men, but another commander knows it's already game over. She charges into the fight and gets herself killed. After Noel, the commander, dies, the 10th Division's leader takes over and rallies his troops with a heartfelt speech, only to send them straight into the enemy's hands. Mahmut greets these fools with deadly force and charges at them with no mercy. The search crew keeps heading toward the Tower of Silence. Mahmut and his squad tear through the 10th Division like they're nothing and move on to the next obstacle. When they finally reach the tower, Abariga figures they'll have to climb to the top. Nobody complains since they all know they've got to fix this mess before someone else shows up. Urbach gets curious and asks Kiros why Mahmut says he hates war but is such a beast at it. His strategies are next level stuff. Kiros stays quiet and lets Urbach stew in his own dumb questions. Back on the battlefield, Pino charges at his enemies, finally realizing how bad things have gotten. Coco comes to terms with being a failure and betraying Lewis's trust. She gives Pino props for being the best commander and for defying orders to chase the Empire's dream. Pino, knowing he's toast, charges at Mahmut and dies a noble death in battle, going out like a true warrior. As Mahmut rides toward the few remaining Imperial soldiers, he takes out Coco and puts Pino's head on a spike as a trophy. With that, Mahmut claims victory and waits for the first light of dawn. When morning comes, Mahmut gathers the spoils of war and tells one of his fellow pashas to split it all between Lindsay and the others who fought hard to keep the Imperial army out of Espada. Lindsay is a little shocked to be handed such a fat payout, but hey, Torkians are solid people who always keep their promises. Mahmut finally earns the respect of his entire crew. After a brutal war that went on for days, he tells his guys to get some solid rest so they can make it back to Cielo in one piece. As the squad scatters, Mahmut's still grieving the loss of his foster dad. Meanwhile, some coward who managed to escape the enemy stumbles into the camp to tell Frenzel and Adam that Pino's headed toward Espada. But Frenzel's no fool. He figures Pino's being forced to Espada. For now, the plan's to pull back and head home to avoid losing more men. Over at the Tower of Silence, the losers holding Carbajal hostage realize they've been found out when the three musketeers start climbing the tower. In a panic, the losers chuck rocks at them, managing to trip up Kiros and Urbach, but Abariga keeps going. Kiros starts talking trash about Abariga as the locals gather, armed and looking terrified. Turns out these airheads are scared they've been double-crossed by Venedict and Torquay. Kiros tries to remind them of Mahmut's success, but the idiots aren't buying it. One of them calls out Augusto, the clown who locked up Carbajal, and demands he show himself with the director. Augusto rolls up with his buddy, holding a long sword to Carbajal's throat. He declares he's going to kill Carbajal for going against the Empire. One of the locals is all for it, but another refugee calls him out for being a scumbag and supporting an illegal execution. A fight breaks out between the refugee and some locals. Cassandra steps in, warning them to quit fighting each other since they were all refugees once. While Abariga climbs the wall to rescue Carbajal, Carbajal buys time by giving the crowd one last speech before his life's on the line. He says some over-the-top stuff, then finally apologizes for doing nothing and pissing off the people. When he's done, he leaves things to Cassandra and accepts his fate. Abariga is just a second too late as Solomon, the loser, slits Carbajal's throat. After the director's killed, there's an eerie silence. Cassandra picks up Carbajal's head and calls it the will of the people. Meanwhile, Frenzel and Adam are arguing about retreating. Adam doesn't think they should bail just yet, worried Cielo might come after them if they catch wind of it. Frenzel tells him to chill. They've got bigger problems, like the 5,000 El Toro soldiers heading their way. They start retreating, and sure enough, Cielo finds out fast. It hits the bastards who killed their director that they did it for nothing. By nightfall, Mahmut and his crew make it to Cielo and walk into a funeral service for Carbajal. Urbach's ready to start pointing fingers, but Mahmut shuts it down by staying cool and mature. While Augustus and Solomon try to weasel out of blame, Cassandra tells them to shut up and stick to the director's words from now on. By the end of her speech, Solomon and Augustus are left feeling like the pathetic losers they are. Cassandra chats with Mahmut a bit more before saying her goodbyes. Before heading back to Torquay, Mahmut puts the people of Cielo in charge of the anti-imperial alliance, telling them to step up and lead themselves when they're ready. After all that, Abariga and Kiros hang out with the El Toro guys to talk about why Venedict's taking so long. During the conversation, Elbark's respect for Mahmut grows even more. Mahmut sticks around to see the director's funeral through before heading back to Torquay. After the Cielo War, there was talk among the anti-imperial alliance about putting Cielo under Espada's control. Out of 55 countries, 38 voted in favor, but Lucio Doge from Venedict gave a speech that helped Torquay Pashalu claim the territory instead. At the next big Divan meeting, Boyo Boyuk Pasha appointed Mahmut as the governor of Chielo and assigned some officials to back him up. Before wrapping up military matters, Boyuk Pasha also put Mimar Zeki Pasha in charge of rebuilding the city. Mahmut was pretty stoked about his new role and took on the responsibilities head-on. Before the divan ended, Mahmut got a chance to speak. He told everyone that Chielo couldn't keep depending on donations from other nations now that it was part of Torki Pashalu. He planned to rebuild the city of Imalet in Chielo, which would generate revenue to secure the city's future. One of the pashas asked how he planned to get land for such a big project. Zeki, the construction director, suggested tearing down some poor neighborhoods and rebuilding them elsewhere. But Zaganos wasn't cool with that idea. He wanted to preserve the pride and traditions of the Chielo people. He argued that if Torki Pashalu ever expanded into an empire, Chielo could be its first province. This idea caught everyone off guard since no one had thought of it before. Zeki tried to shut Zaganos down with accusations, but Zaganos clapped back, explaining how great empires were built in the past, like the Balt Rhine and Phoenike empires. He even hinted at Torki's potential to become an empire. By the end of it, Mahmut gave in and agreed with Zaganos' vision. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Minister Louis was being grilled by other empire ministers who wanted peace with Torki and an end to the fighting. Louis wasn't ready to throw in the towel though. He pointed out that their army was still 8 times stronger than Torki's and that they'd gained territories like Skoglio and Campana during the campaign. He couldn't understand why everyone was so worried. An old minister suggested they make peace and focus on managing what they already had. But Louis reminded them about Zaganos Pasha, the guy who basically ran the divan and wouldn't stop until the empire was crushed. Elsewhere, Kiros, Abiriga, and Suleiman were chatting about their Padrone's future before shifting to Zaganos' bold new ideas. As a top-ranking pasha, Mahmut had a lot riding on him, especially from the citizens. But even they admitted Zaganos' plan wasn't half bad. It might actually be the perfect time to make a move. After the divan, Mahmut and Zaganos met up like usual. This time, Zaganos congratulated Mahmut for avenging Halil Pasha's death, but Mahmut surprised him by saying that wasn't his goal. Turns out, Mahmut didn't hate the people of the empire. He hated the war and the selfish jerk behind it all. Zaganos was caught off guard for once, but didn't let Mahmut win the argument. Instead, he told Mahmut he might be wrong, but still had the right mindset. Zaganos admitted they were different and accepted that. Mahmut then asked if Zaganos still planned to attack the empire. When Zaganos said yes, Mahmut begged him to stop the war, but Zaganos knew the fighting wouldn't end unless they stopped the Balt Rhine Empire's violent ways. He wished Mahmut luck and encouraged him to keep working toward his goals so he could one day fill the gap left by Halil Pasha. Louis is hosting a lunch meeting with Duchess Lele and Glalat. They're chatting about how to win over the people by using his family's resources and taxes from their new territories to build social welfare projects. The idea? To keep doing whatever they want in other territories without backlash. Even Lele is blown away by Louis's wild schemes, but he spots a big problem: Zaganos Pasha. Louis knows Zaganos won't stop until he takes their empire down. Lele brushes off Zaganos, but Louis asks if she's heard of Mahmut Pasha. Glalat recognizes the name but thinks he's a nobody and tells Louis not to sweat it. Lele agrees, so for now, their focus is on Zaganos, the loyal servant. A few days later, the Divan gives Zaganos the green light to invade the empire with about 40,000 Torkian troops. As Zaganos rides out of Torchi's gates, Suleiman, Kiros, and Abariga talk about his plan, calling it a once-in-a-lifetime shot to crush the empire. Meanwhile, Mahmut gets some awesome construction plans for Imalet from Zeki. After shaking hands, Mahmut and Zeki join Zaganos. Mahmut then says goodbye to Suleiman and Zaganos and heads to Chielo to oversee the city's rebuilding. Once there, he meets with Elbark and Cassandra to talk about how things are going. Cassandra thanks him for helping with reconstruction while respecting their pride. To honor Carbajal's legacy, Mahmut asks Cassandra if they can rename the city Carbajal's Imalet. She agrees, smiling. Elsewhere, Zeki and the pink-haired Pasha chat about their project and how it's a great tribute to Halil Pasha. By evening, Blanca and Vasco finally meet Mahmut Pasha. Vasco shows Mahmut his new weapon design to use against the Empire, but Mahmut, just like Halil Pasha before him, realizes the Empire could copy it and use it against them. So, he burns the plans and tells Vasco he'll understand why when he's older. For now, Mahmut encourages him to focus his creativity on building things that save lives. Blanca watches her poor friend get turned down again. Meanwhile, Frenzel and Adam are stressing about the possibility of an invasion, worried Mahmut Pasha might strike again. Louis dives back into planning his next move to wage war on their neighbors. Over in Hizar, Zaganos thanks Ibrahim, the Vali of Hisar, for finishing the Sinul Cap in just 4 months, a defense so solid even the Empire will struggle to break through. Ibrahim wishes Zaganos good luck on his campaign and lets him pass through the gates. That same day, Zaganos kicks off his conquest of the Balt-Rhine Empire. Mahmud feels grateful for how far he's come. He pays his final respects to the greatest Pasha of all time, Halil Pasha, and continues his journey to greatness.